Chapter 1. In an ancient temple at the border of China, 8 old monks wearing red kasayas sat around a marble-carved 8-treasure lotus altar. Their hands formed the nirvana seal of silence as they kept chanting the rebirth mantra. Namo Amitba Yi, Ta Ta Gato Yi, Ta Di Ta, Amitba Dupo Pai, Amitba Dupo Pai, Amitba Dupo Pai, Siddhanpo Pai. The mysterious scriptures lingered in the grand hall along with the knocking sound of the wooden fish. The ethereal Sanskrit sound penetrated the air and the thick brick walls, and converged into the vast and distant blue sky outside the hall. In the corner of the hall, a tall man in a black suit knelt on a futon. His palms were clasped together and his eyes were closed. His pale lips were also chanting scriptures with a solemn expression. A young monk in his early 20s wearing a magnolia kasaya sat beside him, secretly sizing him up from the corner of his eyes. The man was very tall and looked healthy, but his slightly purple lips revealed the secret that he had just recovered from a serious illness. As early as half a year ago, there were rumors that the man had a serious heart disease and would not live for long. The man's family was one of the most prominent families in China. He was a genius with outstanding ability. At the age of 25, he surpassed his father and several uncles to take the position of the head of the family. He even brought the family out of the mire and pushed it to the peak. The death of the lowly was like smoke, while the death of the superior was like shaking a mountain. The man's life and death determined the rise and fall of a family, and it would change the fate of many people. The news immediately attracted the attention of many people, but the man did not refute the rumors. Instead, he completely disappeared from the public eye. Half a year later, when everyone thought that the man was no longer in this world and some people were rubbing their hands and preparing to make a move on his family, the man suddenly appeared in a high-profile manner and dealt with all the restless forces with thunderous means. The rumors were dispelled. However, the young monk beside him knew that it was not a rumor. Although the monk was still young and his cultivation was not comparable to the 8 elders, a simple face-reading technique was not difficult for him. Half a year ago, the man clearly looked like he was going to die. Half a year later, all the signs of death had disappeared. He had a long lifespan, but there was a thick black murderous aura lingering between his brows, showing signs of being possessed by the devil. This was the result of taking someone else's lifespan and changing the fate of the heavens, so he was stained with the karma of evil. The young monk chanted a Buddhist prayer to the man on the TV screen. Half a month later, when the man brought the Buddha's supreme treasure, the true Buddha Sarira, to his door, he found out that the person who had extended his life was none other than the other party's younger sister, a twin sister whose blood was thicker than water. She gave her heart to her brother and passed away quietly. The monks didn't want to know how many dark, obscure, and dirty secrets there were. The true Buddha Sarira was originally a sacred object of the temple. It had been lost for 2,000 years and finally returned. They could not refuse any of the man's requests, even if the man wanted to use the lifetime cultivation of the 8 elders to send his sister to reincarnation. He wanted his sister to live a happy and healthy life in the next life. The cultivation base of the 8 elders added together amounted to 400 to 500 years of luck. This benefactor really dared to make such a request. At that thought, the monk frowned. The knocking sound of the wooden fish stopped and the ethereal Sanskrit sound echoed in the empty hall for a while. A rich Buddhist fragrance came from the ice jade box placed in the middle of the altar, refreshing the mind. The 8 elders slowly opened their eyes. Because they had lost most of their cultivation base, the wrinkles on their faces became even more crisscrossed and their bodies hunched down. Amitba, we have not let you down. The oldest monk stood up and walked to the side of the altar to pick up the ice jade box. The man had also opened his eyes. He didn't say anything. After kowtowing 3 times, he stepped forward and took the bone-chilling box. The old monk took the lead and walked out of the hall. The others followed slowly and walked to the depths of the temple under a huge Bodhi tree. Just throw the lotus seed into the water. The old monk pointed to a small pond 5 feet square under the tree. The man didn't ask any questions. He carefully opened the lid of the box and held the lotus seed in his palm. That solemn and pious expression made it seem as if he was holding up the entire world. But she was indeed his entire world. She was the meaning of his life. He couldn't bear to let her go. The monks waited quietly. After half an hour, the young monk was the most impatient. He comforted in a low voice, "Mr. Yu, let go. With the support of the 8 uncle masters, Miss Yu will definitely be blessed and healthy in her next life. Everything will go smoothly." The man didn't listen. He pressed the lotus seed tightly against his chest. His expression seemed to be enduring. After a few minutes, he walked to the side of the pond and bent down to put the lotus seed into the clear water. If his sister's body hadn't been cremated when he woke up, how could he be willing to just send her into the cycle of reincarnation? Even if it was against the heavens, he would let her come back to life. Ripples appeared on the surface of the water. A miraculous scene happened in front of the man. He saw a few tender green lotus leaves breaking through the ripples and rapidly growing. In just 2 or 3 seconds, they were lush and verdant. There was even a long thin stem with a pink flower bud swaying in the wind. It was stained with a few drops of sparkling and translucent water droplets, looking very cute. The Buddhist fragrance in the ancient temple was replaced by the elegant lotus fragrance. The 8 old monks put their palms together and chanted Amitabha in unison. The man was knowledgeable. When he saw this scene, he was stunned for a few seconds. For the first time, his cold expression softened. He sincerely said, "I'm ashamed to have wasted the lifetime skills of the masters." Buddha cut his flesh to feed the eagle and sacrificed his life to feed the tiger. It can be said that you have asked for benevolence and received benevolence. What's there to complain about? It's the same for us. The benefactress has already entered the cycle of reincarnation. Her fortune will be unparalleled. It's getting late. Benefactress, please go back. The old monk said lightly. The man thanked him again. He stood by the pond for a long time before reluctantly leaving. When he walked out of the temple, he saw his mother waiting at the door with an anxious expression. A thick black murderous aura gathered between his brows again. He wouldn't let go of anyone who had forced her or harmed her. The 8 elders walked into the pagoda in a single file. They sat around the true Buddha Sarira and meditated. The heavy pagoda door closed with a creak. It was unknown how many years it would be before it opened again. The young monk sighed softly and sneaked into the main hall when no one was looking. He climbed up the 8 treasures lotus altar and took out a book from under the ice jade box. He muttered to himself, "It's already difficult to send a soul to the greater 1,000 world with 400 or 500 years of cultivation. What's more, I have to guarantee her unparalleled fortune, wealth, and prosperity. The 8 uncle masters are inflexible. They'll definitely do their best. If things go wrong, they'll all pass away after the ceremony. In order to protect the lives of the uncle masters, I have no choice but to do this. Please forgive me, Buddha." He put his palms together and bowed to the Buddha statue in the hall. After straightening his back, he wiped away the cinnabar star shifting array on the cover and comforted himself. She's a mortal woman. She doesn't need spiritual energy to cultivate. The greater 1,000 world or the lesser 1,000 world shouldn't be a problem for her, right? This is a romance novel without many twists and turns. The author even labeled it as a sweet pampering novel, He and Loyal Dog Man. She has 400 years of fortune. She can at least get the role of the female lead. I didn't expect that the daughter of a big family would also like to read this kind of silly novel. He casually read 2 pages. His face gradually turned green. He flipped to the back at an extremely fast speed. After a long while, he collapsed on the lotus platform, covered his face and sighed. He was also a genius. Otherwise, how could he become the abbot of a 1,000-year-old ancient temple at such a young age? Reading a novel with 400 to 500 pages in 3 minutes was as easy as eating and drinking. However, there were times when even geniuses fell. This time was one of them. When he asked the man for the female benefactor's relics so that he could perform the ceremony, this book was among them. The moment he picked up the book, he immediately had the idea of turning the greater thousand world into the lesser thousand world. He glanced at the introduction and felt that there was no problem, so he decided to use it as the medium. At this time, when he looked at it again, he was so regretful that his intestines turned green. This book was indeed a sweet pampering novel, but unfortunately, the cannon fodder female supporting character in the book and the female benefactor just happened to have the same name. They were both called Yuxiang. What was more coincidental was that Yuxiang injured her leg when she was young. She couldn't walk, so her fate was similar to that of the female benefactor. It could be imagined that both their souls and bodies were extremely compatible. There was an 80 to 90% chance that they would fuse together. Thinking of the fate of Yuxiang in the book, the monk sighed again. This was a melodramatic story about the wrong child. A merchant's family and a noble's family went out at the same time. Both families' matriarchs were pregnant and their months were about the same. On the way, they encountered bandits. Under the protection of their servants, they escaped the siege and hid in a cave to take refuge. Both families were affected and gave birth prematurely. Because they were in a hurry, the situation was critical, and both families gave birth to daughters. The noble's wet nurse accidentally carried the wrong child. When she returned home, she found that the child's swaddling clothes were of the same color and pattern, but the cloth was very cheap. Only then did she realize what had happened. However, the head of the family died from bandits. The matriarch was heartbroken. If she told the truth, she would be buried with the head of the family. Her son and daughter would also be implicated. After pondering for a long time, she finally chose to keep her mouth shut. Over time, she became mentally ill and passed away after a few years. Before she died, she told the matriarch what had happened. Since then, Yuxiang was reduced from the daughter of the marquis family to a bastard child of unknown origin. She was looked down upon everywhere and was often bullied. Because she was unable to walk, she developed a gloomy and inferior personality. After the female lead returned, she witnessed how the female lead was full of limitless glory and how she was proud of her success. The resentment accumulated in the bottom of her heart completely exploded. She embarked on the path of no return to oppose the female lead. In the end, the female lead schemed against her and married her to a mountain wolf. She was abused to death. The female lead was lucky and scheming. Her personality was also very vicious. In the end, she supported her husband to ascend to the throne and wore a phoenix robe. Even if she sold people, they still had to count the money for her. Even her capable and talented brother and the crown prince were fooled by her. In the end, they suffered a crushing defeat. How could Yuxiang, who had been paralyzed since childhood and had never been in contact with the outside world, compete with such a person? The monk covered his cheek and felt a terrible toothache. He murmured, 400 or 500 years of cultivation, is it enough for the benefactress to get out of danger? She has been paralyzed since childhood. She should be able to get used to a body that is unable to walk. It's okay, it's definitely okay. Buddha will definitely bless her. While he was murmuring, a young novice monk hurriedly ran in and shouted, Abbot, the lotus plant has fallen into the water. We are afraid of damaging the roots, so we don't dare to pick it up. Quickly go and take a look. The monk scrambled to the backyard and saw that the upright stem had fallen into the water. Only the tip of the flower bud was above the water. A few leaves also showed signs of withering. It looked very pitiful. The monk hurriedly jumped into the pond to help it up. He then inserted a bamboo branch into the water and tied it to the thin stem of the lotus. After working for a long time, he finally finished. The young novice monk looked at the withered lotus and said with a sad face, benefactress Yu said that she would come to the temple to stay for a few days every month. If she saw this scene, she would definitely not help our great Buddha reconstruct his golden body. Abbot, what should we do? The monk wrung his wet clothes as he said with a pained expression, take all my spirit stones and pour them into the pond. With 400 to 500 years of cultivation and a pond of spirit stones, this lotus should be able to grow back even if it's broken off from its roots. Quickly go. The young novice monk repeatedly agreed and poured all the spiritual stones that the abbot had collected for more than 10 years into the pond. After a short while, the jade-green pond water slowly became clear and was even suffused with a layer of misty white mist, causing the budding lotus flowers to seem extraordinarily beautiful. Chapter 2. Yu Xiang was practicing her zither in her room when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest and the strings on her fingertips snapped. Her expression changed as she turned her wheelchair and rushed towards the door. As soon as she opened the door, she saw her mother standing outside with a sad expression. Brother has a relapse? Although it was a question, her tone was very certain. She and her brother were twins, each with their own flaws. One was born paralyzed, the other with congenital heart disease. They had been in the sanatorium since they were young and had almost never been separated. Other twins had a better relationship at most, but they were inseparable and had a strong telepathic connection. When her brother was in pain, she was in pain. When her brother was happy, she was happy. When her brother was sad, she cried. When her brother was in danger, she couldn't sit still. No matter how far away they were, this connection wouldn't disappear. Her mother wasn't surprised as she looked down at her daughter. After a long time, she suddenly knelt on the ground and begged, Xiang'er, give your heart to your brother. He has Rh-negative blood and couldn't find a suitable heart for many years. He can't wait any longer. The doctor has matched the two of you and all 12 matches. Xiang'er, Mom is begging you, save your brother. If he dies, family you will be finished. Although she knew that her parents didn't care about her, when she really faced this moment, she still felt like the world was falling apart and her heart was dead. Get lost. Get lost. She yelled at her mother who was kneeling at her feet. Blue veins popped out on her neck because she was using too much force. She went back into the house and smashed everything she could find. The porcelain shards that flew out cut the back of her hand. As a mother, how could she say something like asking her daughter to die? How could she bear it? How could she bear it? She hated her cold parents and everyone in the family, but she couldn't hate her brother. They were born hand in hand and grew up hand in hand. As a cripple, without her brother's protection, how could she live so proudly and unscrupulously? Tears unconsciously flowed down her face. After she calmed down, she turned to her mother who was still kneeling at the door and said, Go prepare for the operation. Be quick, brother can't hold on much longer. It was a good thing for two crippled people to become a complete individual and continue to live healthily. That was what she thought when she closed her eyes under the influence of the anesthetic. Yu Xiang woke up from the chaos and touched his thighs in shock. He had no feeling in his legs since he was born. How could they hurt now? But soon, she was even more shocked to find that her chest was intact, and her heart was beating steadily. However, these abnormalities were not the reason why she sucked in a breath of cold air. She belatedly realized that she had shrunk. With her short arms and legs, she looked like she was only 7 or 8 years old. The memories in her mind came back one after another. She held her forehead and digested them bit by bit. After a while, she groaned in pain. How could there be such an unlucky thing? She had suffered so much in her previous life, and now that she was reborn, she was actually occupying a body that was unable to move. Not only that, she even transmigrated into a book and became the most unlucky supporting female character. Actually, that book was bought by the nanny for Yu Xiang. She said that it was a simple book that didn't require much brain power to read and could help the young miss relax. Yu Xiang looked at the introduction and the first 2 chapters. She found that the supporting female character not only had the same name as her, but was also paralyzed in bed. She felt disgusted and casually threw it beside her pillow. Before she could throw it away, her brother's illness acted up and she died. If she had known earlier, she would have finished reading the book before she died. Now she only knew that this Yu Xiang was a child with a hard life. The curtains to her life's tragedy had begun 3 days ago. She was a step too late and couldn't save herself. 3 days ago, Yu Xiang's nanny died. Before she died, she told the truth to Yu Xiang's mother, the Lin clan, that she had carried the wrong child. The Lin clan's mother and her husband loved each other very much. They couldn't accept the fact that her husband had passed away. They didn't care about the family affairs, their children, or their elders. They only locked themselves in the courtyard all day and hugged their husband's memorial tablet. They relied on the sweet memories of the past to pass their days. They even blamed her husband's death on Yu Xiang, saying that she was a jinx who brought bad luck to her family. She should have been strangled when she was born. Otherwise, she wouldn't have harmed her husband. She already hated Yu Xiang, and when she found out the truth, she hated her even more. She immediately ordered her son, Yu Pinyin, to send Yu Xiang far away to the countryside. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. If it wasn't for the old madam's obstruction, she even wanted to open the ancestral hall and remove Yu Xiang's name from the family. This wasn't the end. On the way to the countryside, the group encountered bandits. Yu Pinyin only suffered some minor injuries, but Yu Xiang fell and landed on Yu Pinyin's body. By a freak combination of factors, Yu Xiang blocked 2 slashes for him. Her leg bones were broken, and she couldn't stand up anymore. She had become Yu Pinyin's savior and had paid such a huge price. If she was sent to the countryside, it would seem that the family Yu was heartless and heartless. When the old madam heard the news, she immediately ordered Yu Pinyin to send her granddaughter back. This tragedy had just begun, and Yu Xiang had arrived. She had suffered for Yu Xiang, and in the future, when the wrong child returned, even if she didn't read the rest of the story, she knew that Yu Xiang was a cliché. She definitely wouldn't have it easy. When she thought of this, Yu Xiang only felt her temples throbbing with pain. She couldn't help but start pulling at her hair. Why did she, Yu Xiang, have such a hard life? Which deity did she offend? Just as she was feeling sorry for herself, a servant girl wearing a Tao Hong gown came in and said softly, "Young miss, eldest miss has come to visit you." Prefecture Yu was also known as Marquis Yongla. After Marquis Yongla was killed by bandits, Yu Xiang's older brother, Yu Pinyin, suppressed a group of ambitious uncles and seized the position of Marquis Yongla, protecting the main branch of the family. Yu Xiang was the second in line. Above him, there was also a concubine-born sister. She was born from a Lin clan servant girl who climbed into bed. Both of them weren't liked by the Lin clan. Because they were in the same boat, their relationship was very harmonious. Of course, this was only Yu Xiang's understanding, not Yu Xiang's. After reading the first 2 chapters, Yu Xiang didn't dare to continue being in love with this concubine-born sister. Yu Xiang was still seriously injured and bedridden, yet she couldn't wait to stab her, which made Yu Xiang's suffering even worse. Since she already knew the plot, Yu Xiang naturally couldn't let her have her way. If she dealt with it properly this time, her future days in Marquis Yongla would be much more comfortable. At this time, no amount of shock or resentment could help her survive. She had to face reality. Quickly invite older sister in. Yu Xiang quickly regained her composure. She endured the pain and shifted her body, half leaning on the soft pillow. "Younger sister, are you feeling better today? Did you drink your medicine?" Yu Xiu asked earnestly as soon as she came in. She gently rubbed Yu Xiang's blood-stained bandage. Her eyes gradually reddened, and not long after, large drops of tears fell down. She was only 12 years old, but she was taller than other girls her age. Her eyes were also quite beautiful. When she cried, her beauty was like a pear blossom in the rain. It was very moving and charming. "Older sister, don't cry. I'm much better now. The doctor said I'll recover in half a month. When the time comes, let's release the 2 kites we made last time to get rid of the bad luck." Yu Xiang looked at her and said according to Yu Xiang's original words. "Okay, older sister will wait for you." Not only did Yu not stop crying, she cried even more fiercely. She lay on the edge of the bed and sobbed with a sorrowful expression. She opened her mouth from time to time, as if she had countless things to say, but didn't know where to start. Yu Xiang's breath stopped. She suddenly turned her head to look at the unlatched door. It seemed like an extremely familiar person was approaching. The feeling of her heart being pulled was so clear. But this was a different world, an illusory world. How could that person appear? She forced herself to calm down and pretended to be anxious. "Older sister, why are you crying so sadly? Did something happen?" Yu didn't speak. She only tightly held Yu Xiang's hand. When Yu Xiang repeatedly questioned her, she cried bitterly, "Younger sister, I vaguely heard the doctor say that your legs will never recover." Yu Xiang was stunned. Yu continued to cry, "Older brother's martial arts are excellent. There are also many imperial bodyguards by his side, Changsui. With so many grown men, there's no need for a weak girl like you to rush forward and block the blade. Aren't you usually the most timid? Why did you have to be so stubborn this time? With your legs crippled, what will you do in the future?" Her crying sounded strangely sorrowful, but these words were extremely untimely. It seemed like they were specially made to provoke her. When Marquis Yongle died, Yu Pinyin was only 5 years old. He couldn't support the family, so the matriarch made the decision to send him into the palace to participate in the selection of prince's attendant. He didn't disappoint and was actually chosen by the crown prince at first glance. Because of this, he kept his title. Since young, he spent more time in the palace than in the marquis household. Due to the large age difference and the few times they met, the brother and sister actually didn't have much affection for each other. Because their mother and grandmother were too biased, Yu Xiang hated Yu Pinyin instead. Once they met, they disliked each other. If one were to say that Yu Xiang was willing to sacrifice her life for her older brother in a time of crisis, even if others wouldn't believe it, Yu wouldn't believe it even if she was beaten to death. In the original novel, Yu Xiang was shocked and didn't think much about it. She opened her mouth and wailed. Just as Yu expected, she confessed, "I didn't even want to save him. I was only tripped by my skirt and fell on him. That's when the knife came down. It's all his fault. If he didn't insist on bringing me to the countryside to play, I wouldn't have met with such a disaster. It's all his fault." She blurted out all kinds of curses and resentment. Coincidentally, Yu Pinyin came to visit his sister at this time. He stood outside the door and listened to their conversation. Then he left quietly. The guilt and love he had for his sister had been completely erased by her increasingly gloomy and extreme personality. Although he had taken care of her when she was growing up, he had never cared about her anymore. Otherwise, he would not have married her to the wolf of the mountain without any investigation. Now that Yu Xiang was here, she naturally wouldn't push away her only support. Her face was ashen and large drops of tears welled up in her eyes. They slid down her cheeks and hung on her sharp chin. Her weak and helpless appearance was something that even a cold-hearted person couldn't help but feel pity for. Yu Pinyin stared at his sister through the gap of the door. His heart, which had been calm for a long time, suddenly felt a stab of pain. Seeing that she didn't respond, Yu leaned forward to wipe away her tears and said softly, "Sister, are you okay? Hurry up and say something. Don't scare sister." Yu Xiang pushed her away and covered her face as she wailed loudly. Her heartbroken cries caused the two little girls to choke with sobs as well. Suddenly, she forcefully wiped away her tears and quietly laughed. Her crying and laughing appearance was extremely strange. Yu's eyes flickered slightly. She grabbed her shoulder and persuaded, "Sister, are you possessed? Hurry and wake up. It's too late to regret now. You must look forward. You still have sister. Sister will take care of you. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid." Yuxiang pushed her away and said word by word, "Regret? What do I have to regret? He's my older brother. He's the backbone of Marquis Yongle. Nothing can happen to him. I'm sad that his leg is crippled, but I'm happy that brother is safe and sound. Without brother, we would have been tortured to death by our uncles. How would we be able to live such a luxurious life? I usually provoke him because I want him to look at me and say a few more words to me. I should be happy that brother is fine." Although her words were filled with righteousness, her tears fell again and wet her lapel. That clearly fragile yet pretending to be strong made her look even more pitiful. Chapter 3. Yu composed herself and put on a distressed expression while gently patting Yuxiang's back. She said in a low voice, "I'm relieved that younger sister can think this way. I didn't expect my little Yuxiang to have grown up." Yuxiang carelessly wiped her tears with her sleeve and sneered at her, "Is older sister really relieved or just pretending? Older sister should be disappointed that you didn't see my pained expression. On the day I was injured and carried back, didn't older sister smile very happily and repeatedly say, 'It's good that you're crippled, it's good that you're crippled.' Let's see if she can still be so savage in the future. I'd like to ask older sister, what exactly did I do to make you hate me so much?" Yu was stunned. Yu Pinyin frowned fiercely outside the door. "You, how did you know?" Yu suddenly turned her head and looked at her two maidservants with a venomous expression. The maidservants took 2 steps back and shook their heads in fear. How did she know? Naturally, it was written in the book. Although she had reincarnated for 1,000 years, only a few hours had passed for Yuxiang. How could she forget a chapter that she had just read a few hours ago? Yu's mind raced and she suddenly turned around to ask, You already knew that your legs were crippled?" She didn't expect this wretched girl to know how to bribe servants and plant spies. "When did this happen?" Yuxiang's smile was bleak. "How could I not know about my own body? It's been 3 days and I can't even move a toe. If it's not crippled, then what is it? After suffering this disaster, it actually helped me see through a lot of obstacles. Older sister, I just want to ask you one thing. What did I, Yuxiang, do to you that you hate me to the bone? I'll let you have the first pick of the fabrics and jewelry that old mistress has bestowed upon you. You can take any of the slightly more expensive decorations in my room if you like them. I'll even give you 5 taels of silver every month. I'm just afraid that you won't be able to live comfortably. Last time, you smashed old madam's most beloved red glazed jade pot spring embroidered with chrysanthemum flowers. I was the one who took the blame for you. I knelt until my knees turned purple and I couldn't walk properly for several days. On the surface, you are extremely grateful and comforting, but secretly, you must be laughing at me, right? I've thought about it day and night, but I can't find anything wrong with you. Elder sister, you have to tell me everything today." Yu was rendered speechless by her interrogation. Her mother had turned a blind eye to the two of them. Because they were in the same boat, she did treat Yuxiang with some sincerity. But the old lady was different. When she was young, she suffered because of the concubine who favored her. When she was old, she lost her legitimate son. Her title and family business were almost taken away by the illegitimate son. From then on, she placed great importance on the difference between the legitimate wife and the concubine. A concubine's daughter should have received not 1 cent less, but she did not receive any more. Normally, she had to be disciplined a little, just in case a concubine's daughter was too ambitious and would cause a disturbance in the family. Yu Xiang could get whatever he wanted. He lived a carefree and ostentatious life, while she lived in fear and trepidation. As time passed, she hated Yu Xiang, and her hatred grew deeper and deeper. But in the end, she knew that her thoughts couldn't be exposed, so she could only grit her teeth and remain silent. Yu Xiang looked at her with a sneer. After a while, she suddenly flipped over the medicine on the bedside table and poured it all over her face. Then she picked up a small teacup and threw it at her. She roared hoarsely, "You can't answer, can you? Yu Xiang, don't have such a heartless elder sister like you. Scram! In the future, you're not allowed to take a single step into my room." For a long time, Yu Xiang had been Yu Siu's sucker, ATM, and punching bag. When necessary, she even helped take the blame. Now that Yu Xiang was here, she naturally wanted to cut all ties with this kind of person. 5 taels of silver a month. Yu Xiang's monthly salary was only 10 taels. She couldn't afford it. The medicine had just been brought over and was waiting to cool down. This time, Yu Siu scalded her quite badly. She immediately jumped up and screamed. Then, the teacup that came flying at her hit her forehead, causing it to swell up. She hissed for a while before she shouted angrily, "Yu Xiang, who do you think you are? How dare you put on airs in front of me? Let me tell you, you're just a wild." Yu Xiang stared unblinkingly at her gaping mouth. It was this sentence that made Yu Xiang live a life worse than death. But before she could finish speaking, the half-closed door was suddenly kicked open. A cold voice pierced her eardrums, "Shut up." Yu Siu immediately kept quiet out of fear. In this Marquis Yongla, the person she was most afraid of was none other than Yu Pinyin. In the original novel, when Yu Siu revealed Yu Xiang's identity, no one stopped her. From then on, Yu Xiang fell into the most embarrassing situation. But now it was different. With Yu Pinyin's protection, even if Yu Xiang's bloodline was unknown, she would still be the legitimate daughter of the Marquis household. Everything was within Yu Xiang's calculations. But she didn't feel the slightest bit of satisfaction. She only opened her round eyes and stared unblinkingly at the extremely familiar tall figure standing against the light. "Brother." As soon as she spoke, big drops of tears flowed out of her eyes. The feeling of their hearts being pulled together was so strong. It was as if they had never experienced life and death, nor had they parted forever. They had only slept for a short while. This little child stretched out her hands and begged for a hug. Her moist eyes were filled with strong and focused emotions. It was as if he was her entire world. Yu Pinyin's heart fiercely throbbed. Without thinking, he stepped forward and pulled her into his embrace. "Don't be afraid. Big Brother will definitely cure you," he promised word by word. Yu Xiang tilted her head to look at his face. She didn't answer, but her tears fell even more fiercely. When she walked out from the light, she discovered that although this person looked 70 to 80% similar to her brother, he wasn't her brother. Although they were both handsome, because he had experienced too much strife and persecution, his eyes contained a thick hostility that couldn't be dispersed. His embrace was also cold and lacked the warmth of snuggling up to her heart. But why was the heartstring that should have been broken with her death still tied to him? She knew that this person wasn't the person closest to her, but her anxious heart still felt comforted. Yu Xiang's thoughts were chaotic. She buried her head in the neck of the person who came and cried incessantly. Yu Siu quietly retreated to the corner of the room. Without Yu Pinyin's permission, she didn't dare to leave. Her shoulder was wet from her tears. The temperature of her tears was actually a bit hot. Yu Pinyin raised his hand and clumsily patted his sister's thin and weak back. Although they didn't have the same blood flowing in their bodies, in her heart, he was her blood-related older brother. She was willing to give up her life for him. So no matter what her name was or where she came from, she was still his blood-related younger sister. This point would never change. His patting movements went from clumsy to practiced. The stiff body in his arms gradually relaxed and the small sobs also stopped. Yu Pinyin tilted his head to look at her. His deep eyes revealed a trace of softness. The little girl was tired from crying. She was sleeping soundly. There were still a few drops of tears on her eyelashes. She looked extremely lovable. Gently wiping away her tears, he took out the extra pillow and laid it flat. After covering her with the quilt, Yu Pinyin lowered his head to look at his sister's sleeping face. After about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he stood up and said lightly, "Come out with me." Yu Siyu hurriedly followed him, her face constantly changing between green and white. When they reached a corner, Yu Pinyin acted as if he didn't see the dregs of medicine on her head and her swollen forehead. He expressionlessly asked, "How did you know about Xiang'er's matter?" Yu Pinyin was only 15 years old, but he was already 7 feet tall. After staying in the palace for 10 years, his methods and temperament were not inferior to that of an adult's. Some of his uncles who wanted to compete with him for the family business had fled far away, some had lost their families, and some were locked up in prison. No one knew when they would be released. Marquis Yongle, which was gradually declining, had gained a firm foothold in the capital thanks to Yu Pinyin's ruthless methods. Who in the entire Yongle Marquis estate dared to disobey him? Yu Siyu twirled her skirt and stammered, that day when I went to pay respects to the old ancestor, I eavesdropped. Big brother, Yu Pinyin didn't wait for her to finish speaking and asked again, "Who else did you tell?" Yu Siyu licked her dry lips, the wet nurse, Zhu Yun, and Wan Bai. They all know. Yu Pinyin's cold gaze swept over Zhu Yun, Wan Bai, and the other maidservants, causing them to simultaneously turn pale. Yu Siyu froze on the spot, not daring to move. Now that she realized what had happened, her heart was filled with endless regret. If it was the previous Yu Xiang, it would have been fine to send her out to fend for herself. However, the current Yu Xiang had saved Big Brother's life, so she couldn't touch her. Now that she had fallen out with Yu Xiang, it was equivalent to falling out with Big Brother. How would she live in the future? Just as she was letting her imagination run wild, Yu Pinyin waved his hand at Chang Sui behind him and ordered, "Take them away and lock them up. Wait for mother to deal with them." The people who were taken away were all her most capable subordinates. Yu Siyu immediately panicked and shrieked, "Big brother, what did they do wrong? Why do you want to punish them? Just for a bastard child?" Yu Pinyin said indifferently, "She is Yu Pinyin's, younger sister. She is definitely not a bastard child. I will only say this once. Remember it well. If you do it again in the future, you can go to the countryside to accompany your concubine mother." She was already 12 and was waiting to be married. What future would she have if she went to the countryside? Yu Siyu trembled all over and quickly lowered her head, not daring to shout again. She waited until the pair of black boots were far away before she let out a breath and sneered, "Wait for mother to deal with them. Mother won't kill Prefecture Yu's loyal and devoted servants for a bastard child. I will wait for Big Brother to send them back intact." In the main courtyard, a hale and hearty old lady with graying temples was resting on the couch with her eyes closed. 2 young maidservants were submissively attending to her left and right, one massaging her legs and the other massaging her shoulders. Another old woman wearing a green waistcoat quietly entered and whispered into the old lady's ear. The old lady opened her eyes with a surprised expression. She really said that? In response to the old lady, "This servant doesn't dare to lie." She really said that, the old woman said with certainty. If she really thinks that way, then the Marquis household didn't raise her for 10 years in vain. She can't even compare to a proper family Yu's bloodline. A concubine's daughter will always be a concubine's daughter. In the end, she can't be seen in public. The old lady sneered and waved her hand. Saving Pinyin is the same as saving the Marquis household. Forget it. No one is allowed to mention her past in the future. Go find the Lin clan and tell them that I have something to tell them. Chapter 4. Seeing the grandson she was so proud of, the matriarch's fierce expression immediately softened. She raised her hand and said, "Sit down and chat with me. We'll talk about those troublesome matters when your mother arrives." Yu Pinyin smiled and sat across from the matriarch to make tea for her. Half a quarter of an hour later, the Lin clan arrived. She didn't have any hairpins on her head, only a white velvet flower on her temples. Her eyes were red and swollen, as if she had cried again. The matriarch drank her tea and said without looking up, "Junjie has passed away for 10 years. Who are you trying to impress by wearing mourning? You're bringing bad luck to the house." The matriarch disliked this daughter-in-law of hers very much. When her son was alive, she didn't allow him to take concubines, causing the Marquis household to wither away. After her son's death, she ran away from reality, leaving behind her son, daughter, and large family business. She only knew how to cry to the heavens. Fortunately, she was still healthy and could handle the household chores. Fortunately, her grandson lived up to her expectations and supported the family. Otherwise, the Marquis Yongla would have long been carved up by those jackals and tigers. She wouldn't even have a place to cry. When she thought of this, the matriarch's expression became even more disgusted. She slammed the teacup on the table. The Lin clan trembled and hurriedly bowed. Yu Pinyin took out a handkerchief and wiped the hot tea that had accidentally splashed onto the back of his grandmother's hand. He smiled faintly, as if he didn't see his mother's pleading gaze. To him, on the day his father died, his mother also died at the same time. Now, his mother was only a spirit temporarily staying in the world of the living. Sooner or later, she would reunite with his father. Although these words were unpleasant to hear, he had heard his mother say them countless times since he was 5 years old. Slowly, he lost his expectations for her. Her heart couldn't hold anyone other than her dead husband. Even that cold memorial tablet was more important than the flesh and blood she had given birth to after 10 months of pregnancy. Oh, no, he couldn't say that now. His sister, who had led a wandering life, could still be compared to the memorial tablet. Yu Pinyin's smile deepened, but his eyes darkened. The old lady patted the back of her grandson's hand and said, "Let's sit down and talk." Lin clan members nodded with tears in their eyes. They sat down next to the old lady and asked, "Pinyin, have you found your sister?" Xiang'er was carried back to the residence, covered in blood. Her legs were crippled just like that, but she did not even look at her, nor did she ask anything. If he was the one in trouble, how would she react? Could she shed a tear for him? Thinking of this, Yu Pinyin suddenly felt bored. He picked up the teacup and played with it carefully. He said carelessly, "Back then, you only knew that their surname was Shen, they had a Lingnan accent, and they were businessmen. You didn't know anything else. The world is so big, I'm afraid I won't be able to find it in a short period of time. Mother, please wait patiently. Moreover, little sister's orchid birthmark is on her wrist. How can it be easily seen by outsiders? Finding it is even more difficult. Then how long do we have to wait?" The Lin clan was anxious and stared at their son. "I can wait, but your sister can't. She's the dignified daughter of the Marquis family, but she was taken to a lowly businessman's house. I don't know what kind of miserable life she has been living. Pinyin, she's your blood-related sister. You should be more careful." Yu Pinyin raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "I know. Sure. Hurry up and find her. That Shen family is all black-hearted and rotten. They gave birth to a jinx and secretly swapped her with our family. They caused your father's death and your sister's suffering. If I find them, I'll make them wish they were dead. The Lin clan said through gritted teeth. And that jinx, why did you bring her back? Hurry up and send her away. If she didn't have evil in her life and jinx you, you wouldn't have met the bandits. The sooner you send her away, the sooner our family can be at peace. A few years ago, the Lin clan hired a traveling monk to tell Yu Xiang's fortune. That monk said that Yu Xiang would jinx his 6 relatives, kill 7 people at the end of the year, and sit in a place of death. He was truly a jinx that was hard to come by in 100 years. Wherever he entered, that family would have endless natural disasters. The Lin clan believed this without a doubt. Ever since then, they avoided Yu Xiang and even used peach wood to make many demon-suppressing talismans, which they hung in Yu Xiang's room. The old madam was a Buddhist believer and was influenced by the monk. She didn't like this granddaughter of hers. However, she was born into a large family after all. She valued rules and couldn't bring herself to treat her granddaughter harshly. She only treated her granddaughter slightly better, but she didn't give her granddaughter any less than she deserved. When she heard the Lin clan's words, the old madam didn't say anything. She picked up the Buddhist prayer beads on the table and silently recited scriptures. Yu Pinyin also picked up a string of Buddhist prayer beads and absent-mindedly played with them. He slowly said, if it weren't for Xiang blocking 2 knives for me, I would have been seriously injured, if not dead. Moreover, Xiang has been in our family for 10 years. Our prefecture Yu has gradually walked out of its decline and flourished with each passing day. When has it ever suffered the slightest bit of disaster? If you ask me, Xiang isn't a jinx. On the contrary, she's my lucky star. She treats me like her own older brother and risked her life to save me. I also treat her like my own younger sister and protect her well. Even if I find my younger sister in the future, I won't send her away. Mother, don't force me to be an ungrateful villain. When the Lin clan heard this, their beautiful faces twisted. Just as they were about to retort, the old madam spoke up, Yen is right. One shouldn't forget one's roots. Yu Xiang saved Yen which is equivalent to saving the Marquis household. We should take good care of her. Even if she can't find a husband in the future, we'll take care of her for the rest of her life. Marquis Yongla doesn't lack a pair of chopsticks to eat with. Moreover, it was your wet nurse's fault for carrying the wrong child. No wonder the family shen. They've also raised my daughter for 10 years on behalf of Marquis Yongla. When the time comes, just give them some money to keep their mouths shut. Don't cause any more trouble. The old madam had accumulated a lot of power, so the Lin clan didn't dare to refute her. They could only grit their teeth and nod. Yu Pinyin put down the Buddhist prayer beads and said with a faint smile, that's right. This son has something to trouble mother with. 3 days ago, eldest younger sister eavesdropped on the conversation between mother and grandmother. She already knows about Xiang's background and told the servants. Those servants have already locked up my son. Mother, please go and deal with them. Eldest younger sister also needs to be taught a lesson. The Lin clan sneered indifferently, so what if the servants know? She's a bastard child to begin with. Can't people talk about it? They took my daughter's place of honor, and now it's time to return it. Let them all go. Don't bother me with such trivial matters. She got up to leave after she finished speaking. The old madam couldn't take it anymore. She slammed the table and scolded, stupid woman. How could I have fallen in love with a stupid woman like you? I was really blind. If you want the news of your daughter wandering outside and not knowing whether she's alive or dead to spread throughout the capital, if you want the scandal of your daughter being raised by a lowly merchant family to be known by everyone, if you want people to ridicule your daughter for being a fallen phoenix or a pheasant that can't fly up the parasol tree and not be presentable, if you want her to be unable to find a good family in the future and be miserable for the rest of her life, then go back and hug your memorial tablet. Ma, go and let them all go. The old woman in the green waistcoat nodded and walked out. The Lin clan finally realized the seriousness of the problem. They hurriedly stopped Mama Ma and apologized to the old madam. "Mother, I was wrong. I'll go and deal with them right now. I won't let any of this leak out. Don't worry." The old madam closed her eyes and secretly prayed to Buddha. Only then did she suppress her anger and say, "The Marquis household has 2 legitimate daughters. One of them has a weak body and was sent to an ancient temple to be fostered. She'll only be brought back when she reaches marriageable age. Both of them crawled out of your womb. They're not bastards. Remember that." The Lin clan was unwilling, but for the sake of their daughter's reputation, they could only hold back their tears and nod. Seeing the old madam wave her hand, they immediately rushed out. Father had been dead for 10 years, but this was the first time her mother was managing the household affairs. It was the first time she was worried about someone other than her father. Her younger sister, who had led a wandering life, had become her spiritual sustenance. Then what about her? What was she? At most, she was only slightly better than Xiang'er. Yu Pinyin raised her teacup to hide the cold smile on her lips. Yu Siyu was lying on a soft couch by the window. A young maidservant was applying medicine for her, glancing out the window from time to time. It was the height of summer. The golden sun was so dazzling that it made people dizzy. Moreover, there was the sound of cicadas chirping louder and louder in the dense foliage. It made people feel particularly irritated. Yu Siyu turned over and asked with her eyes closed, "Have Zhu Yun and the others returned?" The young maidservant glanced out the window again and shook her head, replying to eldest miss, "I haven't seen them yet." She was about to go out and wash her hands when she saw the madam leading a group of people in a grandiose manner. She couldn't help but rub her eyes. The madam stayed in her room all day to remember Master Ho. Apart from the old lady's main courtyard, she almost never went anywhere else. Why would she come to the West Wing today? Could it be that she saw wrongly? The young maidservant rubbed her eyes again. Not only did the madam not disappear, but she was getting closer and closer. Her expression was so gloomy that water could drip from it. She didn't care about the ointment on her hands and hurriedly went to her mistress who was dozing off on the rocking couch. "Eldest miss, quickly get up. The madam is here." Although the madam was beautiful and had a gentle temperament, she was actually a fierce person. She suppressed her husband and forbade him from taking concubines. When her husband died, she immediately sent the concubines far away to the countryside. She didn't even bother to find a decent reason. Although they didn't usually meet, Yu Siyu was very afraid of this madam. She hurriedly jumped off the couch, tidied her clothes, and knelt by the door to wait. The head of the Lin clan didn't ask her to get up. He directly sat on the main seat and ordered people to bring Fong Mama, Zhu Yun, and the others forward. He said in a low voice, "These maidservants and older women have broken their tongues. The prefecture you can't tolerate them. We'll make them mute and sell them. Do you have any objections?" Their mouths were gagged and their hands and feet were bound. At this moment, they couldn't speak of their suffering. They could only stare at their mistress and frantically shake their heads. Yu Siyu braced herself and begged for mercy. "May I ask, mother, what exactly did they break their tongues to make them mute? These maidservants and older women of mine are all first-rate honest people. They definitely wouldn't start rumors and cause trouble for no reason. Mother, please be clear about this. Start rumors and cause trouble." At the mention of this, the anger in the Lin clan's heart that had just subsided began to burn fiercely again. If these people were allowed to spread this rumor, how would her daughter survive when she returned? How would she establish herself in the noble lady's circle? How would she marry? Wouldn't her entire life be ruined? This instigator actually had the nerve to ask this question. Thinking of this, the head of the Lin clan gnashed her teeth in hatred. She picked up the teacup next to her and fiercely smashed it on the ground. She sternly said, "First-rate honest people. First-rate honest people. You even dared to talk about the legitimate miss. You see you, let me tell you, you'd better forget everything you heard in the main courtyard that day. If I hear even the slightest rumor outside, even if you're of prefecture you blood, you'll still be mute and sent to a farmstead. You're already 12 this year, right? If you want to marry into a rich and powerful family or a humble one, you'd better think carefully. After she finished speaking, she waved at the two older women behind her. The two older women took out several small bottles from their lapels. They unscrewed the corks and poured the brown liquid into the mouths of Zhu Yun and the others. They rolled on the ground in pain, but they couldn't make a sound with their mouths open. They could only make broken gasps, which looked extremely frightening. Yu Siyu had never seen such a scene. She hugged her head and shrank into a corner, her body trembling incessantly. They spat out blood and were on the verge of death. They were dragged out by the older women like dogs. Only then did the head of the Lin clan feel satisfied and majestically left with a group of people. Only a few maidservants in the courtyard were lucky enough to escape. Seeing that their mistress had left, they stood by the window and shrunk back to watch. However, they didn't dare to step into the blood-soaked room. Yu Siyu sank into deep fear and was unable to extricate herself. She could only hug her head and continuously murmur, "Why? She's clearly a bastard. What did I say wrong?" Chapter 5. When Yu Xiang woke up again, it was already noon the next day. The room was quiet, and there was no one guarding it. Outside the door, she could hear the chatter of the head maidservant and a few older women. When they talked about something interesting, they even giggled. It sounded very cheerful. Yu Xiang frowned and shouted, "Servants, pour me some water." The chatter and laughter outside the door stopped for a moment, as if they didn't hear anything and continued. Yu Xiang's face was gloomy, but she suppressed her anger and shouted again, "Servants, pour me some water. They're coming, they're coming, they're coming." A maidservant entered the room impatiently. The teapot had been left out for an entire night, so it was already cold. Yu Xiang repeatedly reminded herself that this was the Marquis Yongle, not her and her brother's small home. Only then did she suppress the anger in her heart and swallow the bitter tea mouthful by mouthful. "Wipe my face." She put down the teacup and coldly ordered. The head maidservant secretly rolled her eyes, but she didn't do anything after leaving the room. Instead, she ordered the two new maidservants to serve her. Because Yu Xiang wasn't liked by Madame and Matriarch, and her only brother didn't care about her, even though she didn't have to worry about food and clothing, she didn't receive the respect she deserved. Even Yu Siyu had a more comfortable life than her. After all, the maidservants by her side were all left behind by her concubine mother, so they were easy to order around. Yu Xiang's two head maidservants had more style than her, not to mention her late wet nurse, who had always treated her like a bastard child. The two maidservants were very respectful and nimble. They wiped Yu Xiang's exposed skin clean and refreshed, then went out to get a pot of hot tea and brought it to their master's hand. Yu Xiang exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, and her gloomy face slightly brightened. If her brother was still here, who would dare to neglect her like this? She couldn't think about it anymore. Once she thought about it, her tears would come out again. In her previous life, she had been doted on by her brother and had never encountered any setbacks. She had long developed a delicate temperament. Her tears were shallow, and her temperament was unpredictable. But here, she lived a life of suffocation. She had to think thrice before doing anything, and she had to be patient. She was almost cultivating into a ninja turtle. Yu Xiang felt a lump in her throat. She quickly raised her chin to stop her tears from falling. If no one felt sorry for her, who was she crying for? It was better to save it and use it where it should be used. She sat there in a daze for a moment before the head maidservant came in with two younger maidservants. One of them was carrying medicine and the other was carrying porridge. Both were steaming hot. After instructing the two servants to put the bowl on the table, the head servant said indifferently, "Miss, drink the medicine first before eating the porridge." "I don't drink it. You stay here and let the two girls go out." Yu Xiang leaned against the soft pillow and closed his eyes. The head servant waved her hand to let the two leave. She took a few steps forward and continued, "Miss, drink the medicine first. It won't be effective when it cools down." Yu Xiang finally opened her eyes. Her deep eyes exuded a cold aura. She said word by word, "I said I don't drink it, so I don't drink it. Why are you so annoying?" As soon as she finished speaking, her fingertips flipped the tray, spilling the bowl of medicine soup and the bowl of hot porridge. Freshly boiled water could burn off a layer of skin when it was poured on the skin. The maidservant immediately dodged and screamed repeatedly. The maidservants outside the room all ran in to check. Yu Xiang's gloomy face finally relaxed. She used a handkerchief to wipe her hands unhurriedly. "Go to the front yard and find my brother. Tell him that I don't want to drink the medicine. Ask him to think of a way." The head servant, who had just recovered from her fright, began to shout, "Master Ho must be in his study right now. If we rashly go and disturb him, we will be punished with a plank. Miss, please don't make things difficult for us servants." Everyone nodded in agreement. However, a new maidservant volunteered and raised her hand, "Miss, please wait a moment. This servant will go and find Master Ho." As soon as she finished speaking, she was already far away. "That's my good maidservant." Yu Xiang shifted the soft pillow and stared at the head servant with a resentful expression. She began to hum a song. Su San left Hongtong County and came to the main street. "I haven't spoken yet. My heart is miserable. Gentlemen of the past, listen to me." Although Yu Xiang was a cripple in her previous life, she was prouder than anyone else under her brother's protection. She laughed and scolded, doing whatever she wanted. When had she ever cared about anyone's attitude? No matter how the plot of the original novel developed, since she had replaced Yu Xiang, she had the final say on how to live her life. That head servant saw that she was suddenly angry and suddenly laughing. It was obvious that she was deliberately tormenting others. She secretly cursed in her heart, "You broke your leg, so your temperament is even more disagreeable. Just keep on acting so that Master Ho will get tired of you sooner." Because Yu Xiang's wet nurse already knew that Yu Xiang wasn't of the blood of the Marquis household, she only treated her with respect on the surface. In reality, she was very disrespectful. The two maidservants under her followed her example. Their attitude couldn't be said to be respectful or humble. Moreover, Yu Xiang was young and slow-witted. She couldn't control this group of servants. She was clearly the master, but she was even more sullen than the maidservants. Right at this time, the other head servant, Cui Shi, who had gone out to play, came back. Seeing the room full of broken porcelain and medicinal congee, she wanted to find someone to clean it up. However, she was stopped by her good sister. She whispered, "We've angered Mississippi. Let's kneel down and beg for forgiveness." After saying that, she left the room and knelt outside the door. Cui Shi had a tacit understanding with her. She immediately knelt down and made a cowering appearance. Yu Xiang didn't pay attention to the two of them. She was leisurely humming a tune. These two were sent by the matriarch. Normally, their faces were even bigger than their masters. If the news that Yu Xiang wasn't of the blood of the Marquis household spread, the people who broke the bowl today would be them. As expected, Yu Pinyin had some ability. At such a young age, she was able to control the Marquis household like an iron bucket. That rumor should have been suppressed. She didn't know how Yu Siyu made this matter known in the book. How did the main character come back and establish herself in the circle of nobles? How did she become the empress? She must have gone through many difficult and inspirational processes. Thinking of this, Yu Xiang chuckled and shook her head. If she could live comfortably, why would she want to make things difficult for herself? She didn't want to be inspirational, nor did she want to counterattack. She only wanted to increase Yupinyan's favorability and save enough money. When she found the main character, she would exchange it back. Then, she would buy a manor. Accompanied by the smoke of the kitchen chimneys and watching the shadows of the flowers under the moon, she would live a leisurely and carefree life. As for marrying, she didn't even have the luxury of having her brother protect her in her previous life. It was even more impossible in this life. In ancient times, which man would be willing to marry a cripple? Even if it was because of Marquis Yonla's prestige. When Yuxiang's background was exposed, she would only end up in an even more miserable state. Forget about it. After careful consideration, Yuxiang glanced at the two pitiful maidservants who were about to cry at the door. The corners of her lips curled up in disdain. Not only did they not clean the room, but they also knelt outside and pretended to be pitiful. This was a disguised form of making Yupinyan look bad. Master Ho, look, the miss is being willful again. She's randomly smashing things and punishing servants. However, they forgot that Yuxiang had sacrificed her 2 legs for Yupinyan. The rest of her life was ruined. Now, she had the right to be willful. From Yuxiang's memories, she knew that although Yupinyan's methods were ruthless and his actions were vicious, he also clearly distinguished between kindness and hatred. As long as she didn't go against the main character, he would protect her for the rest of her life. Even if they didn't talk about glory and wealth, they could at least live a stable life. The female lead's family would at least be able to prosper for another 100 years, right? As for her 2 legs, based on the outdated medical conditions of ancient times, she didn't have much hope. In any case, she was already used to it in her previous life. Yuxiang touched her heavily bandaged knees with an indifferent expression. The 2 maidservants knelt at the door and listened to their missus babbling and humming. She didn't say a single word of comfort. They looked extremely at ease. The resentment in their hearts increased by 10 points. They secretly held their breaths until their eyes turned red, waiting for Master Ho to come over. As Yuxiang hummed, the feeling of being pulled together came back again. She straightened her slightly raised lips and hid her carefree expression. Her eyebrows furrowed and she blinked her eyes. A wet mist covered her pitch-black eyes, making her look as if she had been greatly wronged. The 2 maidservants were stunned by her ability to change her expression. They stared blankly for a while before coming back to their senses. When they turned around, they saw little Master Ho striding over at an extremely fast speed. The 2 maidservants hurriedly knelt and kowtowed. Just as they were about to complain, they saw that little Master Ho had already entered the room without looking sideways. The 2 maidservants knelt in place with awkward expressions. The 10-year-old girl wasn't very old, but she wasn't very young either. Her body was very thin and weak, and her hair was dry and yellow. It was clear that she didn't receive any special treatment because of her status as the daughter of the first wife. Her facial features were very light, but her eyes were very large and round. Her pupils were as black as ink, and they were soaked in shallow tears, making them appear even more limpid. Her appearance couldn't be considered beautiful, but it made people want to cherish her. Yupinyan quickened his pace and asked with a frown, "What's wrong with Xiang He?" When he got closer, he discovered that the ground was covered in porridge and broken porcelain. "Older brother, my legs hurt." Yuxiang reached out to the youth, and the tears that had been swirling in her eyes all this time fell down in large droplets. This person clearly wasn't her older brother, but what was with that extremely familiar telepathy? Although he was confused, he was also relieved. Yupinyan didn't care about the mess on the ground. He quickly walked over and hugged the pitiful girl into his arms. Yuxiang's legs were crippled because of him. Not to mention smashing a few bowls, even if she tore down the house, he would let her do it. After suffering such a calamity, who could still laugh and be indifferent? It was natural for her to be willful and throw tantrums. He would indulge her, accompany her, and coax her through this most difficult time together. Thinking of this, Yu Pinyan's arms tightened around Yu Xiang's. It won't hurt any more in a few days. Xiang, bear with it. Yu Pinyan had never been so close to his biological sister. His words were very clumsy, and he could only help her wipe her tears while patting her back. The youth's embrace was warmer than the last time, and there was also a faint but elegant fragrance of incense. It smelled very good. Yu Xiang's anxious feelings were soothed bit by bit, but her tears fell even more fiercely. Her hands tightly wrapped around the other person's neck, and she sobbed incoherently. Why is it that you're not my older brother, but our hearts are connected? Could it be that I really can't go back? Yu Pinyan lowered his head to carefully decipher his sister's choked words, but he could only hear her constantly calling out to him. Older brother. That strong attachment made his heart ache. In this large marquis household, the only person she could rely on was herself. The two maidservants were still kneeling at the door. Their expressions changed from resentment to embarrassment, and then to fear. What are you standing there for? Hurry and find a doctor. Yu Pinyan coaxed his sister to stop crying, and then he turned to look at the two maidservants. The two maidservants quickly got up to leave, but they heard little Master Ho say indifferently, "The house is so dirty and messy, but you don't care about it. What's the use of you servants? You might as well sell them all." The two maidservants were horrified. They immediately knelt down and begged for mercy. They didn't dare to do it again. Because they didn't have time to give Yu Xiang a bad look, they didn't provoke Yu Pinyan's anger. He only gave them a beating and let them go. Chapter 6. The doctor came in with a medicine box, took her pulse, and prescribed a new dose of painkillers. The two maidservants didn't dare to be negligent. They personally brewed the medicine and respectfully brought it to their master's bed. They scooped up a spoonful and blew on it to cool it. Then, they said softly, "Miss, drink the medicine." Yu Pinyan brought over a soft pillow and placed it behind her. Then, he spread out a handkerchief and covered her clothes. Yu Xiang turned her head to the side with a deep frown. The maidservant stared blankly for a moment before hurriedly handing over the spoon. Yu Xiang shook her head left and right, refusing to comply. The maidservant was a bit anxious. She wished she could pinch her chin and force the medicine down her throat, but she didn't dare to show the slightest bit of impatience because little Master Ho was watching from the side. "Xianger, don't make a fuss. Once you drink the medicine, your leg won't hurt anymore." Yu Pinyan pressed down on her moving head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "Older brother, only drink if you feed me." Yu Xiang grabbed his large palm and pitifully pleaded. Yu Pinyan smiled helplessly. He took the bowl, blew on it to cool it, and then fed it to her pale lips. This time, the little girl didn't dodge and obediently drank the medicine. Her face immediately distorted. It was obvious that she was very afraid of bitter. However, when he fed her again, she still drank in big mouthfuls. The tears that had just disappeared began to swirl in her eyes again. Her small appearance was indescribably pitiful, but her pitch-black eyes were filled with determination. Even though she was injured like this, she didn't complain or hate him, nor did she collapse into despair. She was just throwing a little tantrum and throwing a tantrum. This little sister of his was stronger than he had imagined. The youth's cold gaze gradually softened. After feeding the medicine, he picked up a candied fruit from the plate and stuffed it into his little sister's mouth. Seeing her eyebrows instantly relax, the corners of his lips couldn't help but rise. "Older brother, my leg doesn't hurt at all," Yu Xiang said with certainty. The smile in Yu Pinyan's eyes deepened. How could the medicine's effect be so fast? The little girl was obviously comforting him. "Older brother, can you feed me medicine every day in the future? If you don't come, there's no one to talk to me." The radiance on Yu Xiang's face dimmed. "Okay. Yu Pinyin tucked the messy hair in front of her forehead behind her ear. His mood was very complicated. From now on, in this huge marquis household, Yu Xiang could only rely on himself. Pinky promise. Yu Xiang stretched out his pinky and wagged it gently. Even if they weren't related by blood, they would still have some feelings for each other over time. Yu Pinyin was the only person Marquis Yongle would protect her. Naturally, she had to get along well with him. Pinky promise. Yu Pinyin also stuck out his pinky. Yu Xiang clung onto him and refused to let go. After a while, she couldn't bear the fatigue and fell asleep. Yu Pinyin waited quietly. Seeing that she had fallen into a deep sleep, he carefully pulled out his finger. However, he saw that she suddenly trembled. Her round eyes were filled with fear. When she saw the figure in front of the bed, she quickly regained her composure. In the end, she was frightened by that disaster and left an indelible shadow. Yu Pinyin hurriedly leaned forward and patted her, murmuring, "Don't be afraid, Big Brother is here. It's okay, it's all in the past." Yu Xiang softly snorted and slowly closed her eyes. Suddenly, she forced herself to open them again and said, "Big Brother, help me get all my things back. She's too bad, I would rather throw them away than give them to her." She didn't know when the real person would come back. It could be a few years, or it could be a few days. Yu Xiang had to start saving money now to make plans for the future. The things he gave to Yu Siyu were all very valuable. In addition, he gave her 5 taels of silver every month. After giving them to her for 6 years, he had given her a total of 360 taels of silver. It could be considered a huge sum. Even though she wasn't the descendant of the Marquis household, these things couldn't buy her legs. She didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt when she took it. Yu Pinyin didn't understand for a while, but when he saw her forcing herself to open her eyes and wait for him to answer, he could only nod his head repeatedly. After coaxing her back to sleep, he thought about it and shook his head with a smile. He quietly walked out of the room and looked at the 2 maidservants standing in the corridor. He asked, "Do you remember what things you usually took from Xiang'er?" These 2 maidservants weren't easy to deal with. They spent all of their monthly allowance on themselves and didn't save a single cent for Yu Xiang. They just took whatever they wanted and emptied the private treasury. In their opinion, Yu Siyu taking advantage of Yu Xiang was the same as taking advantage of them. Unfortunately, Yu Xiang was a fool and would grant her every request. Yu Siyu's wet nurse was also very good at stirring up trouble. If she caught them red-handed, they were afraid that the matriarch would hear about it. They could only pretend to be generous, but in reality, they were scared half to death. How could they forget what Yu Siyu took? They hurriedly reported it one by one. At the same time, their hearts were uneasy. They were afraid that little Master Ho would investigate Yu Xiang's private treasury. Yu Pinyin simply didn't care about the matters of the inner residence. After writing down the list, he ordered someone to ask for it and then returned to his study. Xiang'er lost her legs because of him and half her life was ruined. He would definitely do his best to make up for it. As for Yu Siyu, she could only take what she should take. It was best not to think about anything else. Even if the real Yu Xiang was wandering outside and it was unknown whether she was alive or dead, it still wasn't her turn to be Marquis Yongle's legitimate daughter. Yu Siyu was badly frightened yesterday. Late in the morning, she was still lying sickly in bed with a wet handkerchief covering her forehead. A young maidservant came in with a wash basin and softly called out, "Eldest miss, it's time to get up." Yu Siyu turned over and ignored her. However, she heard the maidservant put down the copper basin and run out. She said in a surprised tone, "Mama Feng, why are you here?" Mama Feng wasn't an outsider. She was Yu Pinyin's wet nurse. She did her best to raise Yu Pinyin and had some face in the Marquis household. Yu Siyu couldn't afford to be offended and struggled to get up to greet her. "Eldest Mrs. complexion is very poor. Are you sick? Why didn't you send someone to find a doctor? Mama Feng smiled kindly and said with concern. Yu Siyu's eyes gradually reddened. She lowered her head and said in a low voice, the doctor went to sister's place. I sent people to look for him 4 or 5 times yesterday, but he still didn't come. I'll just apply the handkerchief myself. It'll save me a lot of trouble. Mama Feng's smile faded and she inwardly shook her head. Even in this situation, she still didn't forget to put second miss in a bad light. How foolish. Although second miss wasn't of the Marquis household's blood, she currently held the position of the daughter of the first wife. Competing with her was an attempt to suppress the first wife. How could the matriarch tolerate this? Moreover, second miss had saved the Marquis's life and was crippled. How could the Marquis treat her unfairly? Becoming enemies with second miss was equivalent to becoming enemies with Master Ho. She didn't know what eldest miss was thinking. Mama Feng muttered in her heart. She didn't answer her and went straight to the point. Eldest miss, this old servant came under Master Ho's orders to ask for property on behalf of second Mississippi. Please make things convenient for me. Ask for property. Yu Siyu's weak voice immediately rose several octaves. What property do you want? It's the property that eldest miss used to take from second Mississippi. This is the list. Please take a look. Eldest Mississippi. Mama Feng took out a piece of paper from her sleeve and handed it over. Yu Siyu took it and looked at it carefully. Her beautiful face distorted beyond recognition. She questioned in a shrill voice, how can you take back something that you've already given away? Second sister is so unreasonable, yet eldest brother is actually indulging her. Some of the things she stole were placed in the room, some were used to bribe the servants, but most of them were used as money to help her concubine mother. How was she supposed to return them now? She never expected that Yu Xiang's personality would become so surly after her legs were broken. She continuously punished her to the point where she was unable to speak. Second miss crippled her legs for Master Ho and gave up the rest of her life. Not to mention that second miss only wants her things back, even if she wants the stars in the sky or the pearls in the sea, Master Ho will get them for her. I hope that eldest miss will not bicker with her on account of second miss being seriously injured and unable to calm down. Master Ho is still waiting for this old servant to report back. Eldest miss, please send someone to get them. Mama Feng bowed slightly. Her attitude seemed gentle, but in reality, it was unyielding. Since Yu Pinyin had spoken, how could Yu Siyu dare to disobey? After searching for almost an hour, she only managed to gather 10 to 20% of the items. As for the remaining 80 to 90%, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't explain where they went. She was a young lady from the boudoir and had her own monthly allowance. The Fu also provided for her food and clothing, yet she still spent 300 to 400 taels every year. Mama Feng wouldn't believe that there wasn't something fishy going on. She probably used it to help that concubine mother of hers. Mama Feng secretly noted it down and ordered people to carry away the pitifully small amount of things. She also added more than 10 boxes of precious treasures that Master Ho had given her and carried them into second Mrs. courtyard. Once Mama Feng was far away, Yu Siyu fell onto the couch in a daze. After a while, she came back to her senses and looked around the empty room. A huge sense of humiliation welled up in her heart. Those things were originally the property of the Marquis household. What right did a bastard like Yu Xiang have to take them? She was the legitimate young lady of the Marquis household. How could she be bullied by a bastard like her? Madam was muddle-headed, and so was brother. She didn't believe that ancestor would also be muddle-headed and condone a bastard like her acting like a tyrant in the Marquis household. Thinking of this, Yu Siyu immediately changed her clothes and rushed to the main courtyard with red eyes. In the main courtyard, the matriarch was sitting cross-legged on the couch with a scripture by her feet and a string of prayer beads in her hand. She was resting with her eyes closed. Mama Ma, who was accompanying her, quietly came in and whispered in her ear, "Matriarch, eldest miss is kneeling outside and crying. She says she wants to see you." Kneeling and crying. What's wrong? The matriarch didn't even open her eyes. Mama Ma told her about the second miss's request for the property. Only then did the matriarch open her eyes and say, "Yu Xiang has finally come to her senses. I've watched her coldly for many years, but today, she finally has some of the demeanor of a legitimate daughter." When she said this, she thought of her granddaughter who was living outside and fell silent. Mama Ma didn't dare to disturb her, so she stood obediently to the side and waited. After a while, the matriarch waved her hand, "I don't want to see her. Go and tell her that destroying Yu Xiang is destroying Yu Xiang. If she dares to mess with the legitimate children and ruin the reputation of the Marquis household, even though I've been a vegetarian for many years, I can still be ruthless." Mama Ma bowed and agreed. After she left, she passed on the message to Yu Siyu without missing a word. Yu Siyu returned to her room in a daze. She pondered for an entire afternoon before she finally understood what the matriarch meant. The real Yu Xiang was living outside, and it was unknown whether she was dead or alive. She could be living a safe and smooth life, or she could be a slave or a maidservant. She could even be living in poverty. If she kept this matter under wraps, she could find her in the future and quietly erase her past, thus restoring the reputation of the Marquis household. If she made a fuss, destroying two Yu Xiangs was secondary. What was more likely was that someone would use this against the Marquis household. At that time, not to mention the matriarch, even her eldest brother wouldn't forgive her. If she was ruthless, it wouldn't be as simple as banishing her to a farm. Chapter 7. After Mama Feng delivered the items, she attached a list of items and sat in second Mrs. room for a while before leaving. Yu Xiang waited until she was far away before picking up the list to check. However, she saw her eldest maid Cui. She snatched the list from her hands without asking and happily said, "Miss, I'll help you put the items in the storeroom." Yu Xiang frowned, "Give me the list, let me see." "What are you looking at, miss, you can't read." "I'll help you keep it, it can't be wrong." "Cui," she said as she opened the door curtain and lifted her leg to leave. Her good sister Cui Ping stood outside the window and gave her a meaningful glance. Her eyes were overflowing with greed. Although the matriarch didn't forget to buy things for Yu Xiang every season, and they were all high-quality fabrics and jewelry, she wasn't as generous as Master Ho. The chest was full of antiques, jades, pearls, and precious stones. When opened, it was dazzling. There were even a few chests of unique little golden pigs. They were arranged neatly and looked charmingly naive, making people drool. The two saw that Yu Xiang's legs were crippled and she didn't have the ability to take care of herself. It must be hard and tiring to serve her, so they planned to find some way to transfer to little Master Ho's side. Based on their looks, they might even be able to snag a position as a concubine. Just as they were suffering from a lack of money to bribe them, the young Marquis sent someone to deliver himself to their door. It was truly the will of the heavens. The two felt as if their hearts were being scratched by a cat. They hated that they couldn't immediately fly to the storeroom and encircle the things they wanted. In the past, Yu Xiang was a fool. She listened to everything they said and trusted them in every way. The current Yu Xiang was used to seeing the fickleness of human nature and the fickleness of the world. How could she not guess their thoughts? She raised her eyebrows and sneered, "Give me the list, I'll keep it. In the future, when I learn how to read, I'll be able to understand it. Those things don't need to be stored in the storeroom. Put them all in my room. Put them all." Cui, she was already half a step over the threshold. When she heard her master's order, she was dumbfounded. These are older brother's kind intentions. Naturally, I have to put them in the most conspicuous place to show my respect to older brother. What, is it wrong? Yu Xiang stared at Cui Shi without blinking, his eyes dark and bottomless. She really couldn't say that she was wrong. But if all of them were placed there, what would he take? Cui Ping, who was standing outside the window, anxiously ran in and pointed around. "Miss, look, there is no extra space in this room. Wouldn't it be a mess to put them all on the table? It's better to put them away." Yu Xiang smiled carelessly. "Put all these old decorations in the warehouse and replace them with new ones. How can it be messed up? Why are you being so long-winded? Hurry up and get someone to bring the things in and arrange them neatly for me. My house is full of bad luck, so I can use the golden jade qi to wash it away." The two of them stiffened their necks and stood where they were, not moving at all. It seemed like they were scheming something again. Yu Xiang raised his eyebrows and said, "I can't order you around, right? Fine. Tao Hong, Lu, go to the front yard and look for older brother. Tell him that I don't have enough servants here, so I want to borrow a few people from him." Tao Hong and Lu were the two new girls. When they heard their master's call, they quickly threw down the things in their hands and ran to the center of the yard to answer loudly. If they really went, Master Ho would be able to find out that something was amiss. Not only would they suffer, but they would also implicate their entire family. Cui Shi and Cui Ping were finally afraid and quickly shouted, "Don't go, don't go. We have enough people in the yard. We will find someone to bring them over. Miss, please wait for a moment. Tao Hong, Lu, come back." Yu Xiang hooked her finger at Cui Shi, "Give me the list. In a moment, you will arrange the items according to the order on the list. Although I don't understand, it isn't difficult to count them." No wonder Yu Xiang was so stupid. He was 10 years old and still hadn't entered school. Not only was he illiterate, he was also clueless about the 4 arts. He only knew how to play all day long. How could he not be fooled? However, this couldn't be blamed on her. A few years ago, the Marquis household was in a precarious situation. The matriarch tried her best to help Yu Pinyin keep his title, but neglected her 2 granddaughters. It wasn't until last year that the emperor issued an imperial edict and appointed Yu Pinyin as Marquis Yongla that the family finally lived a peaceful life. When Cui Ping and Cui Shi heard their master's words, their hearts were filled with anger and fear. This person's legs were crippled, but her brain was still sharp. She blocked all their paths, making it difficult for them to do anything. For her to be so vigilant, did she discover something? The 2 girls went out with pale faces. About half an hour later, Yu Xiang's room was completely changed. Originally, it could only be considered elegant, but now, it could be said to be magnificent. The empty dowry was filled with jewelry. Placed in the open were all priceless antiques and jades, making people not know where to put their hands and feet. "Miss, should we put away these boxes of golden pigs?" Cui Shi did not give up and asked. "No, just put them next to the pillow. Anyway, my legs are crippled, so I have nothing to do. Counting them in the morning and in the evening can make me happy." Yu Xiang held the boxes close to her chest and narrowed her eyes in satisfaction. "How can we put them next to the pillow? What if they are stolen?" Cui Ping showed a worried expression. "If they are stolen, then I'll naturally look for you to compensate. If you can't compensate, then I'll throw you out. If you can't even look after these things, then what use do I have for you?" Yu Xiang took out a small golden pig and put it in her mouth. She gently blew on it and glanced at the 2 girls with ridicule. Cui Ping and Cui Shi were completely speechless. They stiffly bowed and left the room. The current Yu Xiang's temperament was surly and her actions were treacherous. It was really hard to guess what she was thinking and what she would do. Staying by her side always made them feel like they were walking on thin ice. Yu Xiang put away the golden pig and put the box next to the pillow. She gently stroked her aching legs and sighed. After working for a day and a night, she finally managed to hold on to the first 2 chapters of the story. Yuxiang was now the legitimate miss of the Marquis household. She no longer had to look at other people's faces and live in fear. As for the next part of the story, she was really in the dark. She did not know anything and could only watch as she walked. But 3 things were very clear. First, he had to firmly cling to Yupinyan's golden thigh. Second, he had to save more money in preparation for leaving the house of Marquis in the future. Third, he had to stay away from the female lead. As long as she resolutely followed these 3 points, her life would not be difficult. As for this group of wicked servants, it would not be too late to deal with them after her relationship with Yupinyan had improved. After recuperating for a month, Yuxiang's wounds finally healed. Only a foot-long scar was left on her left and right kneecaps. Because of the injury to her nerves, she was paralyzed and could not stand up. During this time, Yuxiang's mother, the Lin clan, did not ask about her. Her grandmother also did not come to visit and only ordered people to send a lot of precious herbs. Yupinyan kept his promise and came to accompany her every day. He even sent her a wooden wheelchair. Because Zhuge Liang invented the wheelchair a long time ago, this thing was not rare. Between the brother and sister, one was indifferent and did not like to talk, the other was still thinking about her brother. She could not walk out of the shadow of her previous life and could not get close for a while. The 2 of them stuttered for a while and then fell into a long silence. In order to avoid embarrassment, Yuxiang closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. She did not know that Yupinyan always stayed by her bedside for a long time before leaving. On this day, Yuxiang woke up early in the morning and ordered 2 maidservants to push her around the small courtyard. At noon, she drank a bowl of old duck soup and ate 2 bowls of rice before falling asleep on the bed. Suddenly, thunder rolled in the sky and lightning flashed. Soon, there was a pitter-patter of rain. Yuxiang was clearly lying in the room, but she did not know how she appeared on a small path. She walked forward in the mud and heard the sound of horse hooves and wheels rolling behind her. She quickly went to the side of the road to ask for help. When she turned around, she discovered that the person riding the tall horse in front was Yupinyan. She was overjoyed and raised her hands to shout. Yupinyan did not seem to see or hear her and rushed past like the wind. The carriages also rumbled forward, completely ignoring Yuxiang's cry for help. Yuxiang's legs were stuck in the mud and she could not move. She could only watch as the carriages went further and further away. When the carriages were about to turn the corner, they saw a mudslide coming from the mountain. In an instant, the carriages were smashed into pieces. Many large chests fell out of the carriages and were smashed into pieces by the mudslide. Yuxiang looked carefully and was stunned to find that the chests were filled with silver ingots worth 10 taels each. They were washed down the mountain stream by the mudslide and fell into the surging river by the side of the road, never to be found again. She did not know whether Yupinyan and the others were dead or alive. Yuxiang gasped for breath and suddenly sat up. She discovered that she was still in the tent and everything that had happened just now was a dream. That was true. If it wasn't a dream, how could he walk? She patted her chest and tried to calm herself down, but she could not get rid of the panic in her heart. In her previous life, whenever her brother was in danger, she would feel the same anxiety. Because of this, her brother was able to avoid many assassination attempts. This was also the main reason why she was able to keep a place in front of the old master. However, she had never had such a realistic dream. It was as if everything in the dream would happen in the near future. The more Yuxiang thought about it, the more panicked she became. She shouted loudly, someone come quickly." Tao Hong and Lu Lu were guarding the side room next door. When they heard the shout, they immediately ran over. "Go, find brother. Tell him that my leg hurts badly." Yuxiang waved her hand. The two saw that her face was deathly pale and her forehead was covered in cold sweat. She seemed to be seriously ill. One hurriedly ran forward to take care of her, while the other lifted her skirt and ran to the front courtyard. The day before yesterday, there had been continuous rainstorms. The Yellow River near Sanmen Gorge had burst its banks and flooded. It had already submerged Luoyang, Yanshi, Gongyi, and several other cities. Hundreds of thousands of people had died in the flood and millions of people were homeless. The losses were disastrous. The emperor immediately issued an imperial edict, ordering the crown prince to personally go to Sanmen Gorge to provide relief. As the crown prince's study companion, Yu Pinyin was naturally part of the entourage. Because of the urgency of the situation, the group didn't dare to delay. They received the imperial edict and prepared to leave. When Tao Hong arrived, Yu Pinyin had already taken half a step over the threshold. The reason Yu Xiang was paralyzed was to save him. Yu Pinyin couldn't just leave her alone. He ordered someone to pass a message to the crown prince, saying that he would be a bit late. Then, he hurriedly went to the west wing. He was wearing a navy blue brocade robe. His collar and cuffs were inlaid with auspicious clouds and golden edges. His appearance was exactly the same as in her dream. When Yu Xiang saw this, her heart immediately went cold. She was even more determined to prevent him from leaving. This person was her only golden thigh. If something happened to him, she would be a cripple, a bastard, and a star of misfortune. She wouldn't be able to live in the Marquis household anymore. Chapter 8. Seeing that Yu Xiang was covered in cold sweat and her face was deathly pale, Yu Pinyin quickened his pace and asked anxiously, "Does it hurt badly? Did you find a doctor?" Yu Xiang tugged on his sleeve and asked, "Brother, where are you going?" The little girl's entire body emitted a strong sense of uneasiness. Perhaps it was because he had accompanied her every day recently, but once he left, she became afraid. Yu Pinyin sat by the bed and gently comforted her. "Brother went out to do some work and will be back soon. Xianger, don't be afraid. If there's anything, go find Mama Feng. She will take care of you." Yu Xiang was thinking about how to make him stay when Lulu came in with a doctor. She simply let the doctor take her pulse and by some time. Yu Pinyin waited patiently. Seeing that the doctor said there was nothing serious, she was relieved. She then ordered the maid to quickly boil the medicine and fed it to Yu Xiang. Yu Xiang drank as she racked her brains to think of a solution. Unknowingly, she drank the entire bowl of medicine. Yu Pinyin saw that her face was not as pale as before and stuffed a candied fruit into her mouth. He skillfully pulled out a soft pillow and laid her down. Carefully covering the corner of the quilt, he told her to, "Don't be afraid, take good care of yourself." Then he was about to leave. In her previous life, Yu Xiang could sense her brother's safety and had never made a mistake. Although she had a different brother in this life, that feeling did not disappear. Instead, it became stronger. Thinking about it carefully, this could be considered a good thing. If Yu Pinyin had a safe and smooth life, then she could also have a safe and smooth life. Moreover, Marquis Yongle had a lot of enemies and the court was turbulent. Yu Pinyin would definitely face a lot of calamities in the future. She did not know the plot. Perhaps the author had written the Marquis Yongle to decline in order to increase the female lead's motivation. He was only waiting for the female lead to return to show her power and then push the Marquis household to the top. Everyone in the household, including the matriarch, would have to kneel and lick the female lead's boots. Thinking of that scene, Yu Xiang felt a chill run down his spine. He could not imagine what kind of blame he would have to bear after the decline of the Marquis household. All sorts of crimes would definitely be piled on her head. Who told her to be a cannon fodder supporting female lead, destined to be a weed that serves as a stepping stone for the female lead? But she, Yu Xiang, had been proud all her life. When had she ever been a stepping stone for others? Although she wasn't the female lead, she still wanted to live a comfortable life. Therefore, nothing must happen to Yu Pinyin. Yu Xiang clenched his teeth and moaned sorrowfully, making an expression of unbearable pain. Yu Pinyin hurriedly turned around and hugged her through the quilt, feeling her up and down. He then ordered someone to call for a doctor. The doctor did not go far. After taking the pulse again, he was really anxious. He kept saying that there was no problem with the pulse. But Yu Xiang's cries became louder and louder. Her hands clung onto Yu Pinyin's neck as she begged, "Brother, I'm in pain. Brother, don't go." Yu Pinyin was choked to the point that he couldn't breathe. He also saw her dark eyes darting to his face from time to time. He felt a little guilty, but also a little crafty. Thinking about it, he asked, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, "Xianger, are you pretending to be sick, hm? Brother is only going out to run errands. It's not like he won't come back. Don't be afraid." He felt a little helpless, but he also liked the feeling of being wholeheartedly relied on and trusted by someone. "Brother, don't go today. You can go tomorrow. I had a nightmare." Yu Xiang did not intend to hide her ability. She explained in detail, "I dreamed that you were wearing these clothes and riding on a horse. Behind you were many carriages and soldiers. You walked through a small path. On your left was a mountain, and on your right was a canyon. There was a big river in the canyon. Suddenly, there was a rainstorm. You walked faster and faster. When you turned a corner, mud and stones rushed down from the mountain and flooded the carriages. The boxes in the carriages were smashed by the stones, and the silver ingots inside all fell into the river. They could not be found anymore." As she described in detail, Yu Pinyin's expression changed from not knowing whether to laugh or cry to astonishment. This time, when the crown prince left the capital, he did bring 8 million taels of relief money. This matter was not known by anyone other than the emperor and his entourage. Xianger's dream was really strange. When Yu Xiang said the words nightmare, Cui Ping quietly went out of the room and rushed to the main courtyard. She stood by the window and watched her leave. She thought, "You can coax Master Ho, I don't believe that you can also coax the old madam. Just because you had a nightmare, you pretended to be sick and stopped Master Ho from running errands. If the old madam finds out, she will definitely peel off a layer of your skin." Thinking of this, she quickly covered her mouth with her handkerchief and secretly sneered. When Yu Xiang saw Yu Pinyin's expression soften, she quickly tried to persuade him. However, she did not expect the old madam to step through the threshold with her walking stick and sternly said, "Xianger, don't make trouble. Go, help the young miss to sleep." With a wave of her hand, 2 strong mamas came forward and forcefully pulled Yu Xiang out of Yu Pinyin's arms and pressed her down on the bed. "Yandere, go quickly. Don't delay the crown prince's errands." When she looked at her grandson, the old madam's stern expression slightly softened. "Old ancestor, Xianger's body has not recovered yet. Please take good care of her. My life was given to me by Xianger. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here and talking to you." Yu Pinyin vaguely reminded the old madam not to make things difficult for Yu Xiang. Although he had many doubts in his heart, the crown prince was 17 years old this year. It was the first time he took charge of an important task since he entered the imperial court a year ago. Moreover, it was such an important task. Countless eyes were watching from inside and outside the palace. Yu Pinyin could not refuse at all. He patted the top of his sister's head and left without looking back. Yu Xiang raised her arm and shouted, "Brother, if it's raining heavily, stop immediately. Don't be in a hurry. Remember, don't be in a hurry." Yu Pinyin waved his hand and went further and further away. Yu Xiang stopped struggling and lay on the brocade quilt to catch her breath. The mamas retreated and obediently waited for the old madam to speak. Tao Hong and Lu Lu were somewhat worried, but Cui Ping and Cui Shi were secretly rejoicing in her misfortune. The old madam walked forward step by step with the help of her walking stick. Her tone was very strict. I originally thought that after suffering such a disaster, you would be more sensible than before. I didn't expect that you would still be the same. Your brother is handling the most important task. If he is dragged down by you, the emperor and the crown prince will blame him. The entire marquis household won't be able to bear it. Yu Xiang lowered her eyelids and whispered, "Old ancestor, Xiang knows her mistake. Before Yu Pinyin safely returned, she should obediently stay here." The old madam saw her pale face and cold sweat. She looked very weak. She also remembered the words her grandson said before he left. She thought to herself, forget it. She saved her grandson's life and crippled his legs. It was already good that she was willful and not crazy. With a long sigh, the old madam said, "It's good that you know your mistake. Don't make trouble in the future. Go to sleep. I'm leaving." Yu Xiang hurriedly agreed and let Cui Ping and Cui Shi send her out. Cui Shi saw that the old madam was all talk and no action, so she was very dissatisfied. She pretended to be worried and said, "The old madam, second Miss Dream was indeed a bit unreal. She actually said that Master Ho would be washed away by the mud and rocks." "Shut up." The old madam didn't wait for her to finish and sternly interrupted, "Don't mention such unlucky words in the future. Otherwise, I'll pull out your tongues." The old madam forcefully stomped her walking stick. She cursed her bad luck and quickly walked away. It was as if Yu Xiang's small courtyard was stained with some indescribable filth. Cui Ping and Cui Shi pretended to be in fear and trepidation as they sent the group of people away. When they turned back, they covered their mouths and giggled. Yu Xiang, this star of misfortune, hat, would probably never be removed. Master Ho hadn't even left yet, but she dared to say such unlucky words. Too stupid. After Yu Pinyin left the marquis household, he sped up and finally caught up with the Crown Prince's group at Shirley Pavilion outside the city. The Crown Prince sat upright on a Fergana horse. His figure was tall, and his appearance was handsome. His every movement carried a graceful and elegant expression, and it was very admirable. "What delayed you?" He turned back and asked. Yu Pinyin cupped his hands and said, "My younger sister's old injury relapsed. I stayed behind to wait for the doctor to treat her before leaving. I ask for your highness forgiveness for delaying the journey." The Crown Prince and Yu Pinyin had a close personal relationship. He also loved Yu Xiang, who had risked his life to save Yu Pinyin. Moreover, he was open-minded and kind by nature, so he wouldn't be too harsh on small matters. He immediately waved his hand and said, "It's no matter. Is your younger sister getting better? When we return, take this one's name card to the Imperial Hospital to invite Dr. Xue. He is very skilled in treating bone injuries. My younger sister was already well before we left. Thank you for your highness' concern. When we return, I will shamelessly borrow your highness' name card." Dr. Xue only treated the emperor and crown prince. Ordinary people couldn't request his help. When Yu Pinyin heard this, he hurriedly thanked him. Because of the severity of the disaster, they couldn't delay. The two chatted for a while before urging their horses to hurry on. When they reached a mountain path, the sky suddenly darkened. When they looked up, they saw large black clouds rapidly gathering. Thunder rumbled between the clouds and purple lightning surged. The scene was quite frightening. "Not good, it's going to rain heavily. There's a village 7 or 8 li away. We can take shelter in a farmer's village. Quick, 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 speed up." The guard leading the way roared. The group unconsciously clamped their horses' bellies, intending to rush through the rain. Only Yu Pinyin was hesitant. The more he looked at this path, the more it looked like the one Xianger described. There was a high mountain on the left and a canyon on the right. A large river passed through the bottom of the canyon. The surging river made a loud roar. Xiang'er had never traveled far, but she described this scene so vividly, as if she was there herself. That dream, was it really just a dream? Yu Pinyin secretly clenched his teeth. There was no time to think. Bean-sized raindrops fell fiercely. Someone advised the Crown Prince to change carriages, but the Crown Prince refused. Instead, he rushed ahead of the guards. Yu Pinyin hurriedly followed, but heard a rustling sound. He turned his head and saw a loose stone rolling down the mountain and into the grass. Yu Pinyin's eyes darkened. He chased after the Crown Prince and shouted, "Crown Prince, stop. We can't go any further. It's dangerous ahead." The Crown Prince vaguely heard the word dangerous and thought there was an ambush ahead. He immediately pulled on the reins. The horse raised its front hooves and neighed. After a moment, it steadily stopped. "What's going on? Is there a bandit attack ahead?" he said anxiously. "It's not a bandit attack." Yu Pinyin shook his head. "The rain is too heavy. Let's wait for it to stop before continuing." "Crown Prince, look. The rocks on the mountain are shaky from the rain. It'll be dangerous if we get hit." As he spoke, a rock the size of a cantaloupe rolled down the mountain and fell into the grass by the roadside. If the rock was bigger, it could really take someone's life. The Crown Prince frowned and hesitated. The accompanying Minister of Revenue, Yu Wentao, waved his hand disapprovingly. "It's only 7 to 8 li, half an hour's journey. How could something happen? It's raining cats and dogs. Where can we hide? How long can we hide for?" The Crown Prince felt more and more troubled. "It's better to be safe than sorry. It's a small matter if we get hit, but we can't hurt the Crown Prince. Moreover, we're carrying 8 million taels of relief money. If the falling rock startles the horses and overturns the carriage, the money will roll down the canyon and into the river. Who's going to pay? It's better to be careful." Yu Pinyin argued. Yu Wentao shook his head and was about to refute when the Crown Prince said, "Everyone stop. Find a spacious and safe place to set up camp and rest. Feng Wei, bring a few guards to scout ahead. We'll go after making sure the road is good." Feng Wei was the commander of the Crown Prince's guards. He accepted the order and left without another word. Yu Pinyin took out the tents and set them up. The rain was getting heavier and heavier. Muddy water flowed everywhere. The tents only covered the top of their heads, but their feet were still wet. They didn't know whether to sit or stand. Needless to say, the discomfort was unbearable. If they walked another 7 to 8 li, they would be able to live among the farmers. There was boiling hot water, soft and dry blankets, and delicious food. It was many times better than the wilderness and the pouring rain. The accompanying people didn't say anything, but they were already complaining in their hearts. Yu Wentao sighed to Chongsui. "The Crown Prince is capable, but he's too cautious. It's only half an hour's journey. What can go wrong? He doesn't listen to anyone but that reading companion. His hair isn't even fully grown yet." Chongsui pointed to the tent next door, indicating for his master to be quiet. Chapter 9. The Crown Prince refused to stay in the carriage alone. Instead, he squeezed into a tent with Yu Pinyin, took out some dried food wrapped in oil paper, and slowly ate it. "When Feng Wei comes back, we'll continue on our way. If I let them lie in the rain for a night, who knows how many people will complain about me." The Crown Prince narrowed his eyes and joked. Yu Pinyin nodded and said, "Caution is the parent of safety. With 8 million taels of silver, you have to keep one eye open when you sleep at night, let alone on the road. This is your first time doing such an important task, so you can't be careless. At the end of the month, second brother, third brother, and fourth brother will also enter the court to participate in politics. If I make a mistake this time, who knows how many people are waiting to take advantage of me. Don't worry, I know. The Crown Prince patted Yupinyan's shoulder, and the two looked at each other and smiled. As they ate their dried food and talked, more than an hour passed unknowingly. They heard the sound of galloping horses approaching. Before the Crown Prince could lift the curtain, he heard Feng Wei shout, "Crown Prince, not good, the mountain ahead is collapsing." The Crown Prince was frightened and hurriedly went out to ask for details. The dried food in Yuantao's hand fell into the muddy water with a plop. Everyone else was so scared that their faces turned ashen, and cold sweat dripped down their bodies. Only Yupinyan felt relieved. Mountain collapse? What's the situation? The Crown Prince braved the heavy rain and hurried forward. This subordinate had just walked for a quarter of an hour when I heard a loud rumbling sound from the mountain. Rain and mud rushed down from the top of the mountain, washing away the road and flowing directly into the river. Fortunately, this subordinate was on guard and retreated quickly, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to return. Feng Wei patted his chest with lingering fear. As he spoke, there was another loud sound in front of them. Earlier, everyone thought it was thunder, but now they realized it was a landslide. If the Crown Prince didn't ask them to stop and instead rushed forward, there was a 100% chance that they would hit the landslide and end up without a corpse. Moreover, they lost 8 million taels of relief funds and implicated hundreds of thousands of people in the disaster area. Even if they died, they wouldn't have any good reputation. The more Yuantao thought about it, the more flustered he became. He repeatedly cupped his hands and said with a trembling voice, "The Crown Prince is indeed of the true dragon's bloodline, blessed by the heavens. The Crown Prince is wise, the Crown Prince is wise." Only then did the crowd come back to their senses, and they began to shout as well. Their eyes were filled with reverence. The Crown Prince was also terrified, but he didn't show it on his face. He said calmly, "It's not safe here. Break camp and retreat to an open field. When the rain stops, we'll take the long route to Sanmen Gorge. Hurry up." This time, no one dared to raise any objections. The Crown Prince breathed a sigh of relief after finally subduing the old fox, Yupinyan. Unable to suppress his excitement and fear, he patted Yupinyan's shoulder vigorously and said in a low voice, "Pinyan, thank goodness you stopped me in time. Otherwise, I would have died." Not only did he not have a corpse, but he had also lost the relief funds. Many people were going to smear his reputation after his death. Just the thought of that scene made one's heart turn cold. "Crown Prince, you're being too serious. It's only because you know what you're doing. Otherwise, what's the point of me trying to persuade you?" Yupinyan didn't claim credit for himself. He didn't mention the dream his sister had. The members of the royal family were naturally suspicious. If they thought too deeply, it would be a disaster rather than a blessing for Xiang'er. "I know what I'm doing. Pinyan, thank you very much." The Crown Prince squeezed Yupinyan's shoulder. His gratitude was self-evident. The two of them shook hands tightly, then mounted their horses and rushed back. Because they had taken a long detour, they were delayed by at least 2 days. The Crown Prince sent a letter to the Emperor to explain the reason. The next morning, Marquis Yongle also received Yupinyan's letter. After reading it, the matriarch's face turned pale and she repeatedly cried out, "God bless you." "The old lady, what happened to you?" "But little Master Ho." Mama Ma didn't dare to continue. "Yandere is fine." The matriarch stood up shakily and kowtowed 3 times to the Buddha statue in the hall. Then, she handed the letter to Mama Ma so that she could read it herself. She said with lingering fear, "It was really very dangerous. I just read the letter and I broke out in a cold sweat." Mama Ma quickly read it and her heart suddenly trembled. She whispered in the matriarch's ear, "The old lady, do you still remember what Second Miss shouted before little Master Ho left?" Chui, she said that Second Miss dreamed that little Master Ho was washed away by mud and rocks. Therefore, she didn't let little Master Ho go out yesterday. Look, didn't it match this letter? Brother, if it's raining heavily, stop immediately. Don't be in a hurry. Remember, don't be in a hurry. The matriarch's eyes widened as these words echoed in her mind. Hiss. She sucked in a cold breath and walked away. Go find Xiang'er and ask her what she dreamed of last night. Yu Xiang didn't sleep at all last night. She was afraid that she would dream of Yu Pinyan's death. She repeatedly thought about how she would live if Yu Pinyan was gone. She felt bitterly disappointed no matter how she thought about it. The pillar of the Marquis Yongla was dead because of her. The Lin clan and the matriarch definitely couldn't tolerate her. In this era, women who were abandoned by their families had no way to survive. Moreover, she was a cripple. She would probably starve to death on the streets within 2 days after leaving the Marquis household. When the matriarch arrived, she saw her sickly half leaning on the couch. Her face was sallow, her hair was messy, and her eyes were bloodshot. Her eye sockets were deeply sunken. It was obvious that she hadn't slept all night. When she heard footsteps, she stiffly turned her neck and asked hoarsely, "How is brother? Did you receive any news?" Although she wasn't of the Marquis' bloodline, she had grown up with Yandere after all. Her feelings for him were sincere and not fake at all. Why couldn't she risk her life to save him? Why would she be so worried? When she thought of this, the matriarch's prejudice and estrangement towards Yu Xiang instantly disappeared by 50 to 60%. Yandere is fine, she said softly. You had a nightmare yesterday, so you wouldn't let Yandere go out no matter what. What did you see in your dream? Tell grandmother. Yu Xiang's anxious heart finally settled down. Seeing the matriarch continue to ask, she began to narrate in detail. Yu Pinyan was 16 this year. He had just started his official career. He was ruthless and had many enemies. The person he was loyal to was the current crown prince. Who knew how many disasters he would encounter in the future? If the family Yu didn't take her words seriously and thought that she was being unreasonable, then Yu Pinyan wouldn't be so lucky next time. The matriarch thought for a while after listening, then asked in a low voice, "You really saw a lot of silver ingots fall into the river?" Yu Xiang nodded with certainty. The matriarch continued to stare blankly for a full 15 minutes before she recovered. She touched Yu Xiang's red eyes and said softly, "Good child, you didn't sleep the whole night because you were worried about your brother, right? Did you drink your medicine? Have you eaten any food?" Yu Xiang shook her head. "I don't know about brother's safety. I don't want to drink medicine, and I can't eat." "Good child, good child." The matriarch was very moved. She repeatedly patted Yu Xiang's head. "Drink your medicine, eat your food, and quickly go to sleep. You're tired." Mama Ma personally went to the kitchen to brew medicine and cook for the second miss. After the matriarch finished eating with Yu Xiang, she got up to leave when she saw her yawn frequently. When she reached the door, she suddenly turned back and said seriously, "Xiang'er, if you have similar dreams in the future, you must tell grandmother. Don't keep it to yourself." Yu Xiang nodded in agreement. Naturally, she wouldn't keep it to herself. Yu Pinyan was her only protective talisman. The matriarch left with satisfaction. She caught a glimpse of Cui Ping and Cui Shi who were following behind her. She cautiously said, "Take good care of Miss in the future. If you need anything, just ask Mama Ma. If Miss refuses to drink medicine and eat, you have to persuade her. If you leave her alone like today, you don't have to stay in the Marquis household anymore." Cui Ping and Cui Shi whispered in agreement. When the group of people walked far away, they wiped the cold sweat from their foreheads and looked at each other. What happened to the old lady? Why did her attitude change so much overnight? The matriarch returned to the main courtyard. She knelt in front of the shrine and chanted for a while. Only then did she relax. Mama Ma helped her up and brought her a cup of hot tea. When she sat down, she asked the old lady, what happened to Miss Dream? This was a warning from Bodhisattva to Xiang'er. The matriarch used the lid of the cup to slowly remove the foam from the tea. She looked absent-minded. If Yandere didn't stop and directly rushed over, the scene in the dream would have become reality. Those silver ingots should be the relief funds brought by the crown prince. It should be at least this amount. She stretched out her hand. 50,000 taels. Mama Ma bared her teeth. 5 million taels, maybe more. At this point, the matriarch's forehead was covered in cold sweat again. She sighed and said, fortunately, Xiang'er gave him a warning, so Yandere didn't rush over. Otherwise, not only would he have lost his life, the entire Marquis' estate would have to suffer as well. 5 million taels, even if the Marquis household was wiped out, it still wouldn't be enough to pay for it. Yu Xiang was a little girl who didn't know much about the world. How could she know what Yandere was doing when he left? How could she know that the crown prince was carrying relief funds? But she had dreamed about it and described it in detail. It was as if she was there. At this moment, the matriarch no longer had any doubts about her words. Mama Ma sucked in a breath of cold air and shouted in horror, 5 million taels. Oh my God! Thank you for Bodhisattva's blessing, thank you for Bodhisattva's blessing. Master Ho was dead, and the Marquis household was raided. They, the servants, had no way to live. This was really a blessing from heaven, a blessing from heaven. Mama Ma bowed to the shrine and whispered, Master Ho was right. Miss isn't a jinx, she's clearly his lucky star. Matriarch, look, in just a month, Miss helped Master Ho avoid death twice. This is too mysterious. If it wasn't a person with great fortune, why would Bodhisattva be willing to warn him in his dreams? The matriarch was silent for a long time. Finally, she waved her hand and said, send the 2 bolts of shark gauze and the 100-year-old ginseng from my storeroom to Xiang'er. She's a good person. Her intentions were good, but this matter was strange. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, they would have to wait and see. Yes, this old servant will go now. Mama Ma did not let others do it and went to do it herself. These 2 things were bestowed by the emperor and were priceless. The matriarch was reluctant to use them herself and instead gave them to Mississippi. It could be seen that she was really frightened this time. Cui Ping Cui saw that the matriarch suddenly paid attention to Yu Xiang. Although she was angry, she did not dare to be as presumptuous as before. The original track of history, the crown prince went to Sanmen Gorge for disaster relief. Halfway there, he encountered a landslide. Although he was lucky to not die, he lost 8 million taels of relief money and returned in a sorry state. The imperial censor accused the crown prince of being heartless and angered the heavens, resulting in the punishment of tens of thousands of disaster victims. The emperor was furious and ordered the crown prince to repent in the imperial mausoleum and not to enter the court for 3 years. He also ordered the 4th prince to raise money and go to Sanmen Gorge. The 4th prince was calm and capable. He handled the disaster relief perfectly without any mistakes. At the end of the 9th month, he returned to the capital with the Wanmin umbrella. His reputation was greatly boosted, while the crown prince gradually fell silent. Chapter 10. Yu Xiang waited until the old lady was far away before she sat up from her bed. She leaned against the soft pillow and thought, it seems like the dream from last night came true. Yu Pinyin is safe this time. Otherwise, why would the old lady come over to interrogate her with such a kind attitude? Although she couldn't predict her own safety, it was enough to know that Yu Pinyin was safe. She was a paralyzed person, so who would want to scheme against her? Yu Xiang thought as she grabbed a mahogany plaque tied to the bed curtain and asked, what's carved on this plaque? The twisted characters were dyed with a layer of cinnabar, making them look bright red and very eye-catching. Similar wooden plaques were hung by the windows, under the porch, and even stuffed under the mattress. They almost covered the entire courtyard. From Yuxiang's memories, these were all set up by the Lin clan's escort, Mama Kim, and a wretched-looking old nun. When they left, they even splashed a pot of black dog's blood at the door. The fishy smell lingered for a few days before dissipating. Tao Hong ran over and put a soft pillow behind her master's back. She picked up the mahogany plaque and looked at it for a while. Her expression suddenly changed. Yuxiang raised half her eyebrows and said with certainty, "Tell me the truth. Is this the Yanxing technique?" If this girl was willing to tell her the truth, it could be useful in the future. Little Tao Hong nodded lightly, "Miss, this is the demon-subduing talisman. It says." She carefully glanced at her master. "It says, kill all 7 souls, burn the body with karmic fire, right?" Yuxiang sneered. Because she was born paralyzed, she felt indignant when she saw other people running, jumping, and sightseeing. Her temper gradually became irritable. Finally, under her brother's advice, she began to believe in Buddhism. She had read countless Buddhist classics, so how could she be stumped by a few Sanskrit words? She wanted to burn this mahogany plaque the first day she woke up. Now, in the old lady's eyes, her jinx status was removed. Moreover, she saved Yu Pinyan's life, so burning a few plaques was nothing. The Lin clan would be in trouble once the old madam came to her senses. Yuxiang tore down the mahogany plaque and threw it on the ground. Her face was full of disgust. "Find all the wooden plaques in the room and burn them. Go quickly." Tao Hong also felt that this wooden plaque was frightening and had long wanted to get rid of it. Hearing his master's words, he hurriedly agreed. Soon, a thick cloud of smoke rose from outside the courtyard. Cui Ping and Cui Shi smelled the smoke and ran over to check. They cried out in shock, "Ah, why did you burn these peace tokens? Madam has ordered that these tokens must not be touched. Otherwise, it will cause trouble." Tao Hong saw that Cui Pingsue was trying to snatch the unfinished wooden plaques and hurriedly threw them into the fire, saying, "Miss asked me to burn them. These wooden plaques are inauspicious. Stand back a little so that the sparks don't splash on the skirt." Cui Ping and Cui Shi hastily jumped away. One was preparing to go to the main room to complain to the mistress, while the other went into the room to persuade the mistress. Right at this moment, Nanny Ma stepped into the courtyard, followed by 2 old women carrying boxes and baskets. She fanned the smoke and asked, "What a strong smell. What are you burning?" "Mama Ma, you came just in time. Look, they burned all the peace tokens that Madam put up. If Madam asks, how are we going to explain this?" Cui Shi made an expression that looked like she wanted to cry but had no tears. It was clearly a demon suppression talisman. How did it become a peace token? Mama Ma sneered and waved her hand disapprovingly, "Let Miss burn it. If Madam asks, just tell her to look for the old lady. Miss wasn't some star of misfortune. She was clearly a star of fortune. If she let the demon suppression talisman continue to suppress her, how much fortune would be wasted?" Miss legs were crippled. Could it be that she was cursed by this Yanxing technique? Thinking of this, Mama Ma sucked in a breath of cold air. She ordered the servants to carry the boxes into Miss' room and hurriedly ran towards the main courtyard. This Lin clan was really crazy. When she cursed Miss, she didn't even know that Miss wasn't her flesh and blood. If one day she was resentful towards the old lady, would she also do something? Moreover, this Yanxing technique was strange and unpredictable. It was invisible and formless. It was simply impossible to guard against. No, she had to hurry back to the old lady. Yuxiang saw Mama Ma leave as if her butt was on fire. She narrowed her eyes and began to hum a little tune in satisfaction. It had to be said that this Lin clan was stupid. They brazenly practiced witchcraft in the inner courtyard. The old lady had been exhausted by those concubine-born children a few years ago and didn't have the time to take care of her. When she had the time, she would have to take care of her. When one was old, this kind of thing was the most taboo. Yu Xiang smiled even more brilliantly and rushed into the room. Tao Hong, who looked like a cat with a dirty face, raised his chin, opened the box. "Let me take a look." "Yes." Tao Hong pulled out the plug on the copper lock and opened the box. Yu Xiang's expression was indifferent, but Cui Ping and Cui Shi cried out in alarm, "Shark, shark yarn. 100-year-old ginseng. These two things are bestowed by the emperor. They've been in the old lady's storeroom for many years." The two's hearts were full of ants and itched unbearably. "Look at this shark yarn." It was light and thin, like a cloud or mist. It looked pure white, but under the sun, it reflected a rainbow light. Moreover, it couldn't be burned by fire or soaked by water. It was truly a rare treasure. If they used it to make 2 sets of clothes, wouldn't it be beautiful? Of course, this thing was too eye-catching, so the two didn't dare to be greedy. However, the 100-year-old ginseng was different. If they sold it to a pharmacy, they could get 500 taels of silver. In any case, Yu Xiang was a fool. She could use a white radish to fool her. The two's hearts were filled with joy, but they heard Yu Xiang say faintly, "Put the shark yarn in the private storeroom. Take the old ginseng to the kitchen and stew it. I want to drink it tonight." Tao Hong quickly wiped the black ash off his hands and took the old ginseng away. Cui Ping was a little dumbfounded and hurriedly said, "Miss, this old ginseng is old enough. In a critical moment, it can still hang on to your life. Why did you eat it? It's better to keep it as a backup." Cui Shi also chimed in, "That's right. The 100-year-old ginseng's medicinal effect is strong. Miss, your body is still weak. Eating it won't do you any good, it will only harm you. If I don't eat it, do you want me to leave it for the rats in the storeroom? Am I that stupid?" Yu Xiang's lips curled into a sneer. Even if she had a nosebleed from eating it, she still wouldn't let these two things go so easily. Cui Ping and Cui Shi's hearts beat wildly. They didn't dare to open their mouths to stop her. In the main courtyard, the matriarch heard Mama Ma's words. Her face was as black as ink, so black that it could drip water. Her fingertips exerted force and broke the prayer beads. The room was filled with a series of crackling sounds. The servants all lowered their heads, not daring to breathe. The matriarch was angry, but even Master Ho couldn't hold her back. "It's my negligence." The dignified Marquis Yongle actually wantonly used witchcraft. Moreover, the victim was his own daughter. If the imperial censor reported this, Yan He wouldn't be able to keep his title. Didn't the glorious Min Gui Fei from 10 years ago die like this? Her maternal family's 378 people were all executed at the market. His Majesty's biggest taboo right now is this. The matriarch rubbed her forehead and sighed, "These past few years, I've become more and more useless. I didn't even ask about such a dangerous matter and almost implicated Yan He." The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. The matriarch coldly said, "Jinx. I think this Lin clan is the real jinx. Take a few people and search the Lin clan's courtyard. Burn all suspicious things. If she makes a scene, tell her to go back to her maternal family. Don't bring disaster to my Marquis household. This old servant will go immediately. The old lady, don't worry. Fortunately, Miss has her own ideas and has already taken care of everything." Mama Ma softly comforted her. The matriarch waved her hand, her expression tired. The Lin clan's courtyard was filled with her late husband's belongings, all of which were evidence of their love. Mama Ma didn't have romantic thoughts. She took out any suspicious items and burned them, causing the Lin clan to go crazy. They ran to the main courtyard with disheveled hair and cried. The matriarch had just laid down when she was woken up. She was so angry that her blood flowed backwards. She flung out a letter of divorce to completely calm the Lin clan. She also fainted. Right at this time, Lulu brought a bowl of ginseng soup and fed it to the matriarch. Only then did she recover. From then on, Mama Ma felt that the second miss was blessed. The matriarch didn't want to report what happened at home to Master Ho, so Yu Pinyin naturally didn't know. He stayed by the crown prince's side and carried out his tasks with peace of mind. Although the crown prince wasn't omniscient and omnipotent, he was good at using people and accepting advice. He was a natural-born emperor. He had only been at Sanmen Gorge for a month, but he had already taken care of everything. After another 3 days, the crown prince confirmed that the river embankment had been repaired and that the disaster victims had been settled. He decided to return to the capital. On the way, Yu Pinyin excused himself from the crown prince. He wanted to go to Pingsha County to find a local godly doctor for his sister. The crown prince readily agreed. People with great skills more or less had bad tempers. Yu Pinyin went up the mountain to gather herbs, catch snakes, plant vegetables, and water the medicine for the godly doctor. After half a month of hard work, the crown prince reluctantly agreed. The two of them collected herbs along the way. They thought that the crown prince had left them far behind, but they didn't expect to meet up at a relay station. The crown prince's personal attendant, Lai Shun, stood at the entrance of the courtyard. He was talking to a little girl about 10 years old. He looked very anxious. Can this thing really cure my master? If you lie to me, you won't be able to return. I ate this when I got the epidemic. Try it. The little girl didn't feel afraid at all. Instead, she raised the herbs in her hand and smiled brightly. Lai Shun was infected by her cheerful smile and was rather moved. So many imperial physicians were helpless. At this time, they could only treat a dead horse as a living horse. The crown prince's illness came suddenly and fiercely. He hadn't opened his eyes for 3 days. Yu Pinyin strode forward and asked in a low voice, "What epidemic?" "Master Ho, you're finally back." "Master Ho. The crown prince has the epidemic. Did you invite that godly doctor? Quickly go in and take a look at the crown prince." Lai Shun saw the person's face clearly and rushed over as if he had found a pillar of support. Yu Pinyin's eyes darkened. He immediately pulled the godly doctor and hurried into the relay station. Lai Shun wiped his tears and followed in, completely forgetting about the little girl who presented the herbs. The little girl wanted to go in, but was stopped by a guard holding a halberd. She looked at the door for a moment and then left with a regretful expression. She knew that the person who was sick inside was a high official, but she didn't expect it to be the crown prince. That youth just now was also a Master Ho. Which Master Ho was he? If my medicine could cure the crown prince, wouldn't glory and wealth be at my fingertips? I'll come back tomorrow to take a look. She was thinking to herself when she was pulled back by the handsome youth who had hurriedly found her. He warned her in a low voice, "You're being naughty again. There's a noble living inside. You can't provoke him. Quickly come with me. If you get caught, I won't be able to save you." The little girl nodded obediently. She kept looking back as she walked. Chapter 11. Yu Pinyin entered the crown prince's small courtyard and saw Wen Tao and the other old officials kneeling in front of the door. They were all haggard and had sorrowful expressions. There was a scorching sun in the sky, but the courtyard was filled with a sorrowful and cold aura. The crown prince was born after the Yuan empress. He was the eldest and had both ability and integrity. If there were no accidents, he would definitely be the next emperor. However, the first time the crown prince went out on a mission, he was infected with an epidemic. If he died of illness, based on how much the emperor loved him, he would definitely bury everyone with him. The scorching summer wind blew and the old officials began to tremble. It was as if the cold entered their bones. Hearing the sound of footsteps, they turned their heads to look back, their turbid eyes bursting with light. Marquis Yongle. How could they forget that Marquis Yongle was looking for a godly doctor for his younger sister? It really was the protection of the heavens. Master Ho, godly doctor. Yu Wentao trembled as he climbed up. Before he could finish, he saw the cold youth leading an old man into the room. The tightly closed door blocked out everyone's hopeful gazes. Because the crown prince could not stand the wind, the windows in the room were all locked and covered with a curtain, causing the light to be very dim. As they approached the bed, they smelled a strong sour smell. If a person who was not sick smelled it, they would feel uncomfortable. Yu Pinyin did not seem to feel it and walked over to take a closer look. In just half a month, the crown prince had become so thin that he was only left with bones. His tightly closed eyes were covered with thick yellow dirt and the breath he exhaled had the smell of a rotting human body. If Yu Pinyin did not feel the weak pulse at the side of his neck, he would have thought that he had already passed away. Dr. Piao, please treat the crown prince. Yu Pinyin bowed deeply to the old man with white hair and a youthful complexion. Lai Shun had already guessed that the old man was the godly Dr. Master Ho had invited. Seeing this scene, he knelt down and repeatedly kowtowed. He was quick-witted and knew that this kind of divine person would not be able to resist coercion. If he used his power to force him to treat the crown prince, he might even fight to the death with him. The old man calmly stroked his beard and smiled. Yu Pinyin, you have to think this through. I only promise to treat one person. If you save the crown prince, I won't care about your sister anymore. Lai Shun looked at Master Ho with tears in his eyes. Yu Pinyin didn't show it on his face, but his hands in his sleeves were clenched into fists. Between the crown prince and Xiang'er, who was more important? The crown prince's life was in danger. Naturally, they should choose to save the crown prince. However, Xiang'er's leg could not be delayed. Closing his eyes, Yu Pinyin cupped his hands and said, Dr. Piao, please treat the crown prince. The old man laughed mockingly. I thought you were a righteous person, but in the end, you gave up your family for power. If that's the case, I'll treat the crown prince. Yu Pinyin pursed his lips and said coldly, Dr. Piao, there's no need to sow discord. Logically speaking, the crown prince is the emperor, and I'm the subject. It's a subject's duty to be loyal to the emperor, and there's no such thing as bending over power. Logically speaking, the crown prince and I have a deep friendship, and it's not inferior to family. His life is in danger, so naturally, I should choose to save him. My sister's life is not in danger now. Without Dr. Piao, I can still find Miracle Dr. Wang and Miracle Dr. Zhao in the future. It's not a big deal. The old man was so angry that his beard curled up. He snorted coldly, You're so stubborn. In this world, other than me, only Master Ku Hui can treat your sister's leg. Master Ku Hui crossed the sea to Siam 10 years ago, and we don't know if he's dead or alive. If you can't find him, don't come crying and begging me. Saying this, the old man smiled proudly. He picked up the medicine box and walked to the bedside to take the crown prince's pulse. He shouted, Open the window, open the window. If you don't want the crown prince to suffocate to death, quickly open the window. Even Lai Shun, who had lived in the palace for a long time, had heard of Dr. Piao's great name. He hurriedly opened all the windows to let the sunlight in. The strange smell slowly dissipated, and everyone felt refreshed. Dr. Piao took out a set of golden needles and gently inserted them into the crown prince's major acupoints. He then took out a few drops of turbid blood from the crown prince's fingertips, ears, and earlobes. The crown prince, who was on the verge of death, coughed lightly and immediately woke up. His vision was still a little blurry, but it didn't prevent him from recognizing Yupinyan's sculpture-like handsome face. The crown prince smiled and said with certainty, "Yifeng, Yupinyan's courtesy name, you've saved my life again." Dr. Piao wasn't satisfied. He used a silk cloth to wipe the blood from the crown prince's fingertips and reminded, "Your Highness, Marquis Yongle doesn't know medicine." The crown prince smiled and said warmly, "Thank you for saving my life, divine doctor." He seemed to have thought of something, and the joy on his face disappeared. He shouted, "I've already caught the plague in Luoyang. Quickly purchase medicinal herbs and gather doctors to Luoyang to prevent the epidemic from spreading. Go quickly." The day after Yupinyan left, he started to have a high fever. At that time, he thought he had caught a cold and drank a few doses of medicine. By the time he realized that he had caught the plague, it was already too late. He fell into a deep coma, and the last thought in his mind was to gather doctors to save the victims. It was a pity that Yu Wentao and the rest didn't have the ability to read minds. The crown prince was seriously ill, and they didn't have the heart to think about anything else. This delayed them for nearly half a month. They also didn't know if the epidemic had spread to the disaster area. Yupinyan cupped his hands and immediately left to carry out his task. Dr. Piao saw that the crown prince loved the people like his own children and was righteous. Although he didn't say anything, his acupuncture became more stable. Yu Wentao and the rest were still kneeling outside the courtyard. After receiving the crown prince's orders, they immediately burst into tears and cried bitterly. The crown prince was already so ill, but he still cared about the people in the disaster area. His benevolence and righteousness weren't feigned, but they were truly rooted in his bones. The great Han dynasty was truly fortunate to have such a virtuous and talented heir. The group of old officials kowtowed 3 times in succession and went to carry out their tasks with renewed vigor. After returning to the capital, they wrote down the crown prince's words and deeds in full detail in a memorial and presented it to the emperor. The wording wasn't exaggerated in the slightest, but it was enough to satisfy the emperor. Yupinyan's performance also made his eyes light up. He secretly decided to cultivate this young Master Ho, who hadn't even reached the age of 20, into the crown prince's right-hand man. Let's not talk about this for now. Dr. Piao used a set of spirit-steadying acupuncture techniques and pulled the crown prince back from the brink of death. He also prescribed a strong medicine for the crown prince to drink. Seeing the crown prince's face quickly turn red and his eyes become much clearer, he let out a sigh of relief. He waved his hand and returned to his room to sleep. The crown prince had been lying down for 10 days, and now he couldn't lie down anymore. He asked Lai Shun about what happened after he fell unconscious. Lai Shun answered one by one. After hesitating for a while, he finally confessed, "Your Imperial Highness, it was thanks to young Master Ho that you were able to wake up." He then repeated the conversation between Dr. Piao and Marquis Yongle. The crown prince was very moved when he heard this. He sighed deeply at the top of the tent. This autarka's life was exchanged with Yifeng Mimi's legs. This autark is truly ashamed. Lai Shun hurriedly comforted, "Your Imperial Highness doesn't need to think too much. Just find another famous doctor for young Miss Yu in the future." After saying this, he muttered in his heart, "This young Miss Yu's legs were exchanged for Master Ho's and the Crown Prince's lives. It really is precious. If this matter is delayed, there might be a great opportunity in the future." Just these 2 favors are enough for her to enjoy for the rest of her life. On the other hand, Yupinyan ordered people to purchase large amounts of medicinal herbs and gathered many doctors. The next morning, they prepared to rush to the disaster area. The carriage had just left the relay station when they saw an imperial guard entangled with a young girl. The young girl looked very delicate and cute. When the corners of her lips curled up, 2 deep dimples appeared on the side of her cheeks. They seemed to be filled with honey, making people feel sweet when they saw them and not the slightest bit of disgust. It was also because of this extremely pleasing appearance that the Imperial Guard did not harshly stop her. Instead, he kindly advised her to leave. "But my medicinal herbs are really useful. After drinking it, it will be much better the next day. You can give it a try." The young girl held up a paper bag high. When the Imperial Guard saw that he could not persuade her to leave, he could only accept the medicinal herbs. He thought that there were many people in the courtyard who were infected with the epidemic. It was the same to give it to them. As for the Crown Prince, even if they were beaten to death, they would not dare to give him something of unknown origin. The young girl seemed to have sensed his thoughts and said with a smile, "The process of decocting this medicine is very complicated. If there is a mistake, the medicine will lose all its effects. Bring me in, I will help you decoct." Before the Imperial Guard could speak, he heard a bone-chilling voice behind him, "Is this how you perform your duties? You allow suspicious people to approach the relay station and even accept an unknown medicine. If this is a bag of poison, even if you die 10,000 times, it won't be enough to atone for your crimes." The Imperial Guard's legs turned to jelly. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed to the young Master Ho who was striding over. Although this person was only 16, he was a vicious and merciless master who did not recognize even his own family. Those who offended him would only be living a life worse than death. Moreover, every sentence he said was reasonable and every word was a gem, making it impossible for others to refute. It was also because this young girl was too sweet and charming that he couldn't help but let down his guard. If she really was an assassin sent by someone, then there would be a big problem. The more he thought about it, the more scared he became. The Imperial Guard threw away his sword and halberd and kowtowed desperately. The young girl was also scared stiff. The sweet smile on her face was completely replaced by fear and unease. Her pair of watery eyes widened as she pitifully looked at the ice-cold youth. The youth ignored her and stepped onto the steed in front of the gate. He lightly said, "Capture her and properly interrogate her. If there is anything suspicious, report it to official Yu and let him deal with it. The Crown Prince is still sick, so do not disturb him." Before he finished speaking, he had already gone far away. The Imperial Guard repeatedly agreed and straightened his body. There was no trace of warmth on his face. He grabbed the young girl who was about to run away and threw her into the relay station's dungeon. The young girl screamed and struggled violently. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing an orchid-shaped birthmark on her wrist. After only 4 hours, the young girl's parents came begging. Because of her clean background, she also happened to be acquainted with an accompanying official. The family used 70 to 80% of their wealth to redeem the young girl and rushed back to their hometown in Lingnan. After this incident, the originally wealthy family gradually declined. 3 days later, the Crown Prince recovered from his illness. Not only did he not return to the capital, he returned to Luoyang where the epidemic was serious and vowed to advance and retreat together with the people. At the beginning of the 8th month, the epidemic was completely eliminated. Luoyang regained its former prosperity. When the Crown Prince left, tens of thousands of people lined the streets to send him off, their eyes brimming with tears. The Crown Prince's benevolence and righteousness spread throughout the world, and the imperial family became more and more loved by the people. Chapter 12. Yu Pinyin didn't have time to return home before he went to the palace to report on his mission. He only asked Chongsui to pass a message to the estate. The matriarch grabbed Chongsui and questioned him again and again. After half an hour of questioning, she let him go and turned to kneel in front of the Buddhist shrine. With Buddha's blessings, this mission was daunting but not dangerous. When news of the epidemic in Luoyang came, she didn't sleep for 2 or 3 nights. Mama Ma also knelt and said joyfully, "The old lady, look, I already said that second Mrs. Life is blessed. Master Ho originally found a godly doctor for her, but he just so happened to save the crown prince. This luck is so good that there's nothing to say. I don't know which fake monk Madam found to say that a lucky star is a jinx. The matriarch closed her eyes and didn't say anything. Mama Ma chanted a few words of Buddha, then suddenly screamed, "Ayah! Buddha is still in front of you, why are you so surprised?" The matriarch opened her eyes and glared at her. Mama Ma hurriedly covered her mouth, her face changing between green and white, and her eyes kept flickering. The matriarch felt that something was wrong and asked in a low voice, "What did you think of?" "No, nothing." Mama Ma smiled very stiffly. "Just say what you thought of." The matriarch scolded sternly. Mama Ma looked at the compassionate bodhisattva in the shrine and twirled the prayer beads in her hand. Finally, she stammered, "The old lady, Madam gave second Mrs. birth characters to that monk to calculate. Think about it, those birth characters, they weren't second Mrs. birth characters." Mama Ma didn't dare to say what she wanted to say next. Although the two girls were born on the same day, it was impossible for them to be born at the same time. At most, there would be a slight difference. And for things like fate, a slight difference could lead to a difference of 1,000 miles. It was really hard to say. Those birth characters weren't Yuxiang's, but they were her own granddaughters. If the monk was wrong, then so be it. If he was right, then wouldn't that mean that her own granddaughter was the jinx? Indeed, Yuxiang was now 10 years old. In the past 10 years, the Marquis household had not suffered the slightest bit of disaster. On the contrary, it had prospered day by day. This year, they had encountered 2 disasters in succession, but both were avoided because of Yuxiang. The Lin clan said that their son had been killed by Yuxiang. At that time, the 2 children hadn't been swapped yet. When their legitimate granddaughter was born, their son had also been killed by a bandit. This was really, the old lady twirled the prayer beads in a fluster, her fingertips trembling violently. She believed in Buddhism and naturally believed in fate. It was impossible for her to not hate Yuxiang as much as the Lin clan. However, she was experienced and open-minded. Later on, when she saw that everything in the manor was going smoothly, and her grandson was also supporting the family, she slowly became indifferent. Now that she was suddenly told that her granddaughter was the bane of her existence, her forgotten hatred was stirred up again. When Mama Ma saw this, she quickly shrank to the corner and did not dare to breathe. Kowtowing to Emperor Su Shidi, their heads and faces bowed in respect. "Today, I praise De Juandi, and only wish for mercy to bless and protect." Namu Sa murmured, "Samyak Sambodhi." The old lady closed her eyes and recited the clear heart mantra more than 10 times before she regained her calm. In the end, she was still the descendant of the Marquis family. No matter what, she could not be left wandering outside with her life and death unknown. Moreover, that monk might not have any cultivation. It was possible that he had miscalculated. Whether it was good or bad, she would wait until she found him and then see. The old lady kowtowed to the bodhisattva devoutly. After she straightened her back, her eyes darkened. Yuxiang had been waiting day and night, and finally, Yu Pinyin had returned. Unknowingly, the young man had become her spiritual sustenance. With the young man, she felt incomparably at ease. She asked Lulu to find out when Yu Pinyin would return home. She half reclined on the soft couch by the window, eagerly looking outside. The small courtyard was filled with flowers and plants. Purple datura flowers climbed all over the courtyard walls. White jasmine flowers swayed in the wind at the base of the wall. Several red pomegranates were in full bloom. There were also large sunflowers crowded under the promenade, like small suns. The dazzling colors were accompanied by a strong fragrance. It was intoxicating and lingering. In just 2 short months, the empty courtyard had been turned into a Garden of Eden by Yu Xiang. Because she could not walk, she could only rely on planting flowers and plants, reading and writing, and playing musical instruments to pass the time. In her previous life, she was an expert at raising flowers. In this life, she did not know how, but the flowers and plants that she personally planted, no matter how hard it was to take care of them, could survive and grow happily. Seeing this scene, she became more and more fond of taking care of flowers and plants. The old lady had come to see her several times. As soon as she entered the courtyard, she was reluctant to leave. Later, she ordered people to find many exotic flowers and plants for her to play with. Yu Xiang returned the favor by always sending the best and most beautiful flowers to the old lady's courtyard. In this way, the grandmother and granddaughter got closer and closer. The estrangement and distance between them in the past slowly melted as they came into contact. Just as she was pleasantly smelling the flowers, Cui Shi lifted the curtain and reported, Miss Qin came to see you." Miss Qin was the concubine daughter of Count Zhongyong. She was 12 years old this year and was not favored in the count's household. Because Yu Xiang had been neglected by the Lin clan for many years and the old lady neglected to teach her, her personality was somewhat inferior. She did not play with the noble ladies of the same family. Instead, she liked to make friends with girls from declining families who did not have prominent backgrounds. She enjoyed the pleasure of being flattered. Miss Qin was her only close friend. Flipping through Yu Xiang's memories, Yu Xiang could not help but sneer. The little girl was quite pitiful. Her only close friend was a scourge who stabbed others in the back, yet she still happily clung to her. With this kind of personality, in a few years, she would become a proper evil female supporting character. She would be used to set off the kind and beautiful female lead. If she didn't come, what would have happened to Yu Xiang? Thinking of this, Yu Xiang's face darkened. She waved her hand and said, "Let her in." As soon as Qin Fang stepped into the courtyard, she was captivated by the clusters of flowers and lush greenery in front of her. She stared at them for a while before she reluctantly walked towards the side room. Then, she was shocked again. She originally thought that Yu Xiang's legs were crippled and that she would be extremely haggard right now, half human and half ghost. However, when she saw the real person, she discovered that she was many times more spirited than before. She was like a wilted flower bud that had drunk the morning dew and was currently facing the rising sun and blooming. Her withered hair was jet black and soft like silk. Her rough and waxy skin looked as if it had been soaked in milk, tender and bright. Her originally plain facial features had grown a bit, and she actually looked a bit cute. Coupled with a pair of large and bright autumn eyes that looked over, her appearance was not very outstanding, but it made people unable to move their eyes away. Spirituality. Perhaps this was the only word that could be used to describe the little girl lying on the window frame with a lazy smile. "You're here. Sit." Yu Xiang leaned on the couch and pointed at her legs. "My legs are inconvenient, so I couldn't come out to welcome you." In her previous life, she was also born in a large aristocratic family. Her graceful and noble aura had long been rooted in her bones. Just a few short sentences and a single action showed a sense of superiority. Qin Fang suddenly felt uncomfortable all over. After sitting down, she stammered for a while before saying, "Xianger, you've become much prettier." "Is that so?" Yu Xiang stroked the corners of her eyes that were slightly upturned. She also felt rather puzzled. Logically speaking, after these past 2 months of living in fear and working hard, she should have become much more haggard. However, for some reason, her hair was getting darker day by day, and her skin was getting fairer and more tender day by day. It was like dried vegetables and fruits that had been soaked in spiritual spring water, becoming fresh and delicious once again. If she couldn't figure it out, then she wouldn't think about it. Having a healthy body was a good thing. Yu Xiang drank a mouthful of hot tea contentedly. Qin Fang didn't come today to express his condolences, but to laugh at her. She rolled her eyes and asked, "Xianger, I heard that your legs will never recover." "That's right. So what? In any case, my brother will take care of me for the rest of my life." Yu Xiang's tone was indifferent, and there was no sadness on her face. Qin Fang, who had been waiting for her to cry bitterly, was very disappointed. Qin Fang couldn't say the words of comfort that had been brewing in his stomach. He had no choice but to change the topic. The two of them chatted for a while. When Yu Xiang asked the maid to add a pot of hot tea, Qin Fang discovered that the room had changed greatly. Every decoration was luxurious and noble, especially the dowry. Because it was stuffed full of jewelry, it couldn't even be covered. When the sunlight shone in, the colorful light of the jewels could blind people. She stared straight at it, and her face revealed a greedy expression. Yu Xiang's lips curved into a sly smile. "Do you like it? They're all gifts from my brother. Ask the maid to bring the box over for you to take a look." After she finished speaking, she gave Lulu a meaningful look. "Xianger, your brother loves you very much." Qin Fang suppressed the jealousy that kept surging up, and couldn't wait to take the box and look through it. "Of course. If my brother doesn't love me, who will he love?" Yu Xiang leaned over, her fingertips lazily fiddling with several large Eastern pearls. Qin Fang picked up one and looked at the other. She loved it so much that she couldn't put it down. Finally, she picked the most exquisite and luxurious long cotton hairpin and pinned it to her hair. She asked, "Does it look good?" "Yes, you look good wearing anything." Yu Xiang smiled with her eyes narrowed. Qin Fang also smiled, put the box back, and began to talk about other things. After chatting for half an hour, she got up and said goodbye, taking small steps to lift the curtain. After descending the steps, she was already standing in the courtyard. Only then did her eyes reveal some pride. She quickly walked towards the courtyard door. Just as she was about to leave with one step, she heard a languid voice behind her. "Hey, did you forget something?" "Ah. What did I forget?" Qin Fang turned around and forced a smile. Yu Xiang pointed at her head, her voice slightly raised. "Don't tell me you want to take my hairpin. Just like before. The previous ones are fine, you can take them if you want, but this one was ordered by my brother from a merchant in Nilua country." "There's only one in the entire capital, and it's very rare. I can't let you take it away again." Cui Ping and Cui Shi already knew that the current miss was different from before. If they wanted to take advantage of her, they had to be prepared to be slapped in the face. "Look, this taking it away" sentence was slapping Miss Qin's face until it was swollen. Seeing that the servants in the courtyard were looking at her with disdain, if this matter was spread out, she would be stained with the reputation of dirty hands. How could she face others in the future? Qin Fang's cheeks were red, and her facial features were distorted. She hurriedly pulled out the hairpin, and loudly defended herself. "I just forgot to take it off." "You, how can you slander me like this?" "Hey, is that so?" "It's not that I want to slander you, but you took too many things from me in the past, so I'm afraid." "Be careful, this hairpin cost my brother 600 taels of silver. If it's broken, I'll have to ask your mother for a better one." Yu Xiang grinned brightly. The more she spoke, the more dirty water was poured, and her whole body began to stink. Hearing the servants snickering, Qin Fang wished she could find a hole to hide in, but she also wished she could tear apart Yu Xiang's mouth. But in the end, she was afraid of breaking the hairpin and causing trouble in front of her mother. She could only carefully hand it over to the servant girl, cover her face, and run away. "Come again next time." Yu Xiang warmly greeted. If Qin Fang dared to come again, she would change her. She couldn't deal with one less friend like this. Chapter 13. Tao Honglulu exclaimed in a low voice and hurriedly bowed. Dr. Piao nodded at the lively and adorable little girl who was leaning against the window and giggling. Her watery eyes were filled with bits of sunlight. He asked, "Is this the delicate and pitiful little sister you spoke of? I must be old and dim-sighted. She's arrogant, but how is she weak? Isn't she quite powerful? Look at how she's teasing people." Yu Pinyin didn't answer. He walked straight into the courtyard and called out softly, "Xiang'er." The little girl who was laughing cheerfully a moment ago pursed her lips and blinked her eyes. Bean-sized tears flowed out of her eyes as if they were free. Her perky nose was slightly red as she stammered, "Brother." She looked extremely pitiful. If he hadn't happened to see her teasing people, he would have thought that she had suffered a great grievance. This time, he could really see how delicate she was. Dr. Piao was speechless at the little girl's ability to change her expression. "Brother, brother, you're finally back. I missed you so much," she called out repeatedly. Half of her body leaned out of the window and raised her arms to ask for a hug. This was the first time someone had welcomed him so warmly when he returned home. Yu Pinyin's cold and solemn face softened. He hurriedly walked a few steps forward and shouted, "Don't move, be careful not to fall out." He strode into the room and pulled the little girl he had been thinking about day and night into his arms. He weighed her and chuckled. "You're plump and your complexion looks better. It seems like you've been eating well." This familiar and intimate behavior gave Yu Xiang the illusion that she had never been separated from her twin brother. She stared at Yu Pinyin for a long time before reaching out to touch his weather-beaten face. Her voice was full of heartache. "Brother, you've lost a lot of weight. It must have been hard on you." No matter how hard it was, it didn't matter how hard it was to receive a concerned greeting. Yu Pinyin smiled and shook his head. He weighed the little girl again before gently placing her on the couch. Yu Xiang grabbed his clothes with one hand and pointed outside the window with the other. "Brother, who is he?" Dr. Piao was admiring the flowers and plants in the courtyard. The placement of these flowers and plants had not been carefully planned. Wherever there was an empty space, a few pots were placed there. However, because the growth was too luxuriant, it showed a kind of wild beauty. At first glance, one did not feel anything, but at the second and third glance, one could not help but be captivated by this scene of vitality. The courtyard was like the person. This little girl should have some personality. Dr. Piao nodded to himself. When he heard Yu Xiang's question, he walked to the window and answered with a smile, "I'm the doctor that your brother invited to treat your leg. You can call me Dr. Piao." How shameless of him to call himself a godly doctor. Yu Xiang smiled and called out, "Dr. Piao." Dr. Piao nodded with satisfaction and said, "But I have a rule. I only treat one person once in my life. I promised your brother that I'd treat you, which means that you've already used up your only chance. However, coincidentally, the Crown Prince caught the epidemic, so your brother gave the opportunity to treat you to the Crown Prince. I saved the Crown Prince, so I can't save you because both of your chances have been used up. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Yu Xiang's smile did not fade, but Yu Pinyin's face turned cold. He originally thought that Dr. Piao had insisted on returning to the Fu with him because he changed his mind and was willing to treat Xiang'er. However, it turned out that Dr. Piao wanted to see him make a fool of himself and sow discord between him and Xiang'er. If he had known earlier, he would have kicked this old man out. He held his sister's white fingertips and said in a low voice, "Xiang'er, I'm sorry. In the future, your brother will definitely help you find a better doctor. In this world, besides me and Master Ku Hui, there is no one else who can treat her. Where are you going to find a better doctor?" Dr. Piao's face was full of arrogance. Yu Pinyin fiercely glared at him. Just as he was about to drive him away, Yu Xiang grabbed his fingertips and said with a smile, "Brother, why are you apologizing to me? Logically speaking, the crown prince is the emperor, and my brother is a subject. It is a subject's duty to be loyal to the emperor, so naturally, you should save the crown prince. Logically speaking, it was thanks to the crown prince's help that my brother was able to successfully inherit the title of nobility and prevent the marquis household from falling apart. This great kindness should be repaid. Logically speaking, the crown prince and my brother grew up together and have a deep friendship. His life is in danger, but I am safe and sound. Naturally, the crown prince should be my priority. What my brother did was right, so why should I apologize?" Yu Pinyin looked at her in surprise and was speechless for a long time. He really did not expect that Xiang'er would be so understanding. Dr. Piao, however, cried out strangely, "Aya, did you two siblings plan this beforehand? You really don't want to treat your legs? Are you willing to be a cripple for the rest of your life? Don't we still have Master Ku Hui? There's still a long way to go, so there's no rush. Even if we can't find it, it's fine. My brother will naturally protect me. I don't need an outsider like you to worry about me." Yu Xiang pulled on Yu Pinyin's sleeve and asked, "Brother, don't you think so? If she really became estranged from Yu Pinyin because of this person's instigation, then she would be the #1 fool in the world." Yu Pinyin laughed loudly and hugged the little girl in his arms. He rubbed her for a long time and said, "Naturally, your brother will definitely protect you for the rest of your life." Dr. Piao's only hobby was to instigate people while he watched the show from the side. But now, not only did the siblings not quarrel, they were even more affectionate than before. He immediately deflated and waved his hand to leave. However, his gaze was suddenly attracted by a small potted plant placed by the window. This can't be frigid iced Haworthia, right? His fingertips trembled. Frigid iced Haworthia grew in the extremely cold highlands. It looked like a bunch of ice, but it was actually a kind of plant that would only bear a small vermilion fruit every few decades. That fruit was the main ingredient in making frigid iced Haworthia pills. It could cure hundreds of poisons. Every year, many medicine shops would hire people to go to the extreme north to pick it, but they would always return empty-handed. A single frigid iced Haworthia pill was now sold for a sky-high price. However, this ice-shaped plant in front of him not only grew well in a warm region, it even bore 5 vermilion fruits. This was really too unimaginable. Dr. Piao turned the pot around to look at it. After examining it several times, he finally confirmed that it really was a frigid iced Haworthia. AI, it's called frigid iced Haworthia. The name is really nice. Yu Xiang hugged the pot in her arms to prevent it from being snatched away. Yu Pinyin used a strange gaze to size up this bunch of ice flowers that bloomed in the summer. "You actually don't know its species? Then how did you grow it?" The corner of Dr. Piao's mouth twitched. "Grandmother gave me a lot of seeds. I threw them all into the flower bed to raise them. When they sprouted, I moved them one by one into the small pot. If I watered them and let them bask in the sun, then they would live." This was a parallel world. There were many plants that Yu Xiang had never seen before. She could only use this kind of clumsy method to grow them. But it was very strange. All the seeds that she personally planted always sprouted smoothly. She also didn't understand it. Watering. Basking in the sun. It can live like this. Dr. Piao felt like he was about to faint. Frigid iced Haworthia took root in the ice, so it didn't need to be watered. It was even more afraid of sunlight. Was this plant really frigid iced Haworthia? He began to doubt his previous judgment. "Little girl, can you let me take another look? Just one look," he said shamelessly. With her brother here, Yu Xiang wasn't afraid that he would snatch it. After a moment of hesitation, she put the pot on the windowsill and warned, "This flower looks very special. At night, it will even emit a white light. You have to be careful. Don't lose a single leaf." Dr. Piao was still hesitating. When he heard that it could emit a white light, he was sure. He suppressed his violently beating heart and asked in a low voice, "Little girl, can you sell this pot of flour to me? I'll pay any amount of money." This could be a variant of frigid iced Haworthia. It was resistant to heat. If he brought it back and raised it well, he could cultivate many branches. It really was a treasure. "What do you want it for?" Yu Xiang's eyes rolled around. Yu Pinyin sipped her hot tea and slowly said, "Frigid iced Haworthia bears a cinnabar fruit every 20 years. It can be used to make frigid iced Haworthia pills, which can cure hundreds of poisons. On the market, one cinnabar fruit is worth 10,000 gold." Yu Xiang's eyes lit up, but she quickly regained her composure and asked, "If I sell it to you, can you treat my legs?" Dr. Piao wanted to scratch the wall at this moment. He painfully shook his head, "I can't. I once swore that if I broke the sex rules, I would fall into the path of a beast in my next life. But..." He leaned on the windowsill with hope in his eyes, "I can teach you a unique massage technique to prevent the muscles in your legs from atrophy. Otherwise, even if you find Master Ku Hui, there's no way to treat the necrosis of your muscles." Yu Xiang thought for a moment and smiled evilly, "Sorry, I know the massage technique myself. I'm not selling this pot of flour." In her previous life, she had been paralyzed for 25 years. She had more than 10 effective massage techniques in her head. Why would she need anyone to teach her? Hearing this, Dr. Piao was grief-stricken. But he was cured by the little girl's next sentence. "But, I can give you 4 cinnabar fruits. You have to agree to 3 conditions." "What conditions?" Dr. Piao cautiously asked. He could see that this little girl was shrewd. She couldn't suffer even the slightest loss. "First, after you make the frozen jade dew pills, give me 3 of them. Second, in the future, you have to treat my grandmother. Third, you have to treat my older brother. Is it possible? If it's possible, you can take them away now." Yu Xiang counted with her fingers. Okay, I agree. Wait here, I'll be back soon." These 3 conditions didn't go against his principles. Dr. Piao immediately agreed and ran out to buy an ice jade box to store the cinnabar fruit. "Brother, 3 pills. You, me, and old ancestor, 1 each." Yu Xiang narrowed her eyes and smiled like a cat that had stolen a fish. She continued, "The rest of the cinnabar fruit and the bouquet will be given to the crown prince so that he can pass it on to the emperor. This kind of precious thing isn't something that our marquis household can afford to raise. It's just a coincidence that we got it." Yu Pinyin rubbed the little girl's jet-black hair and laughed in a low voice, "My Xiang is becoming more and more clever and sensible. You just realized. Isn't the term exceptionally clever specially used to describe me?" Yu Xiang pointed at her own nose. Another burst of laughter came from inside the room, causing the passing servants to look over. Ever since the old Master Ho passed away, the little Master Ho hadn't been this happy in a long time. In the main courtyard, the matriarch received the news and was stunned for a long time. She had someone casually buy a bag of seeds for Xiang, but she actually managed to grow a stalk of frozen jade dew. This was really strange. Mama Ma smiled so widely that her eyes couldn't be seen. "Aya, she got 3 jade dew pills and Dr. Piao's promise. That's equivalent to having 5 more lives." 5. She shook her hand and sighed in a low voice, "I've always said that the second young miss is blessed." The matriarch couldn't help but sigh, "Xiang is a good person. She's filial and sensible. Although she's not of the Marquis household's blood, she's not much worse than the main branch's granddaughter. She was also able to think of giving the flowers away. Her brain is also extremely clever. It's a pity that her legs are crippled. We finally managed to invite Dr. Piao, but she gave the opportunity to the Crown Prince. After a moment of silence, the matriarch sighed, our Marquis household still owes her. Chapter 14. After Dr. Piao took the cinnabar fruit, he made 3 jade dew pills and sent them to the Marquis household. A few days later, he sent a small grey tree, saying that he wanted Yu Xiang to look after it for 2 days. Yu Xiang extorted a lot of elixirs from him before he agreed. He trimmed the branches of the grey tree and planted them in the flower bed. Every day, he watered the tree and got rid of insects. After 7 or 8 days, the originally grey tree began to turn red from the roots. In just one night, it turned into a fire tree and emitted a faint fishy smell. When Dr. Piao came to get the tree, he was crazy with joy. He ran around the flower bed laughing and jumping, scaring the maids. This was actually a blood-penetrating dragon bone tree. It only grew in the hot volcanic cave. It could be used to make the best medicine. No matter how serious the injury was, even if the bone was broken, as long as this medicine was applied, it would heal in less than half a month. But as soon as the blood-penetrating dragon bone tree left the volcanic cave, it turned gray and its medicinal properties disappeared. Its preciousness and medicinal value were not inferior to the cold ice dew. These 2 plants were known as the ice and fire kings in Chinese medicine. Dr. Piao obtained them all at once. His happy mood was simply indescribable. He sent all kinds of precious pills to the Marquis household as if they didn't cost money. At the same time, he also sent many strange plants. He always asked Yu Xiang to look after them for 2 days. When they grew, he would happily come and get them. If Yu Xiang wasn't of noble birth, he would have spent a lot of money to ask Yu Xiang to help him look after the medicinal garden. He could see that Yu Xiang had a pair of skillful hands that could turn stone into gold. Whatever he planted, it would grow. It was also because of this that the matriarch received a lot of precious tonics and exotic plants from time to time. The hidden injuries caused by overwork were mostly healed. Black hair grew back on her temples, and her spirit became more hale and hearty day by day. When a family held a wedding that required gifts, the matriarch directly went to Yu Xiang's courtyard to pick a few pots of flowers. Wei Zi, Yao Huang, twin lotus flowers, white crown lotus tripod. They were more valuable than antique jade. The old lady loved this granddaughter more and more. She asked someone to find her a very famous female teacher and teach her meticulously. In the morning, Yu Xiang studied to learn how to read and play the zither. In the afternoon, he stayed in the flower bed and didn't go anywhere. She had always liked to take care of flowers and plants, and now she was even more addicted. Sometimes, she would secretly think that God probably felt sorry for her and gave her a golden finger. In the future, when the owner came back, she could still rely on this skill to support herself. Selling 2 pots of lotus crown cauldrons was enough for her to live comfortably for a few years. 80 to 90% of the relatives of this body were unreliable. Humans were emotional creatures. Even if they were not related by blood, they would be closer than family after being together for more than 10 years. When that time came, she would just be an outsider to that family. Of course, this situation did not apply to the main character. She was the female lead and had the halo of a female lead above her head. She carried the great fortune of heaven and earth, so naturally, everyone should revolve around her. Even though Yu Pinyin and old Madame Fu were treating her extremely well now, once the main character came back, all these benefits would belong to the main character. She could only be envious and jealous. Truly, different people have different lives. Yu Xiang hid the bag of flower seeds that she bought with a lot of money in a secret compartment and sighed deeply. If in the future, family Yu became hostile and didn't allow her to take the money, she could still take these seeds. Perhaps she would have to rely on selling flowers to survive in the future. Thinking about how she had her older brother to protect her in her previous life and how comfortable her days were, Yu Xiang's nose began to ache again. For the 10,000th time, she screamed in her heart, "Older brother, where are you? Xiang, can't bear it alone. What's wrong? You can even cry in front of a mirror. When did my Xiang become so weak?" Yu Pinyin silently appeared behind her with a teasing smile on his face, but his heart felt like it was being stabbed. He didn't know when it started, but he couldn't bear to see Xiang show this kind of confused and helpless expression. The guilt that welled up in his heart would always suffocate him. Yu Xiang carelessly wiped her face and said with a straight face, "Which eye of yours saw me cry?" "I didn't cry at all." "Okay, your older brother saw wrong." Yu Pinyin smiled and pulled her out of the wheelchair. He gently placed her on the soft couch by the window and opened the window so that she could enjoy the scenery outside. Summer was almost over, but the sun was still scorching hot. A few new hibiscus trees had bloomed in the courtyard. Large pink flowers hung on the branches, attracting countless bees and butterflies to fly among the flowers. This lively scene made Yu Xiang's mood slightly better. She leaned over the window sill and her eyes followed the butterflies as they spun around. Yu Pinyin loved to look at her eyes that could talk. He took off his boots and got on the soft couch, half hugging her. The brother and sister pair, one admiring the scenery and the other admiring the people, were very comfortable. Although there was an ice basin in the room, the incense still brought a lot of heat. Yu Xiang's nose had a few small beads of sweat, and a refreshing lotus fragrance filled the air. Yu Pinyin thought that his sister's body was stained with the incense, so he couldn't help but move closer. He rested his chin on her neck and didn't want to move. Yu Xiang didn't feel that he was heavy, so she just turned her head and winked at him. The brother and sister looked at each other and smiled. A butterfly flew high and low, hovering above their heads for a moment, and finally landed on the tip of Yu Xiang's nose, making her two black eyes cross-eyed. Yu Xiang reached out to pat it, but it flew away first. Many scales fell from its wings, causing Yu Xiang to sneeze several times. Yu Pinyin laughed loudly. He wiped his sister's nose and asked, "Do you want to go out and catch butterflies? Your older brother will push you." At this time, the wheelchair was made of wood and there were no tires on the wheels, so it was very heavy. Yu Xiang couldn't move it by himself, so he needed the help of two strong women. As a result, he rarely went too far and mostly stayed in the small courtyard. However, Yu Pinyin learned martial arts from a young age. At the age of 16, he was already 7 feet tall. He had broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and a strong body. The weight of the wheelchair was nothing to him. Even if Yu Xiang carried the wheelchair, he could still easily lift it. Yu Xiang slapped away the arm that he stretched out to her leg and said, "You want me to go catch butterflies in the courtyard on such a hot day? Do you want me to die from the heat? I'm not going." After saying that, she rolled her eyes and shouted at the side room, "Suiping, Cui Shi, help me catch a few butterflies." Yu Pinyin chuckled, pinched her nose, and scolded her, "Naughty." As long as Xiang was happy, it was fine. He didn't care if other people would die from the heat. Little Master Ho was next door, so Cuiping and Cui Shi were thinking of excuses to go over and serve him. Recently, the young miss had begun to put Tao Hong and Lu Lu in important positions and rarely ordered them around. They didn't have to work and could still get a monthly allowance, so they were happy and relaxed. They hid in the side room and played cards. Originally, they wanted to wait for Little Master Ho to come before going, but they didn't expect Little Master Ho to quietly appear. At this time, the two of them rushed over, which was a bit embarrassing, so they could only hold it in. When they heard the call, they hurriedly responded with a smile. They put on some lipstick, put on a pearl flower, straightened out their skirts, and gracefully walked over. "Fill this small jar." Yuxiang raised her eyes at Tao Hong. Tao Hong handed over the sparkling and translucent glass jar and the 2 net bags in her hand. Cuiping and Cui she softly agreed, sneaking a glance at the handsome little Master Ho before blushing and leaving. The 2 of them tried their best to show off their beautiful faces, slender figures, and graceful postures. They didn't look like they were catching butterflies, but more like they were dancing. From time to time, they would let out pretentious laughter. Yuxiang loved to see the 2 of them acting like demons in front of Yupinian. At this time, she was lying on the windowsill, giggling non-stop. There was no other way. There was no internet here, so she could only find some entertainment for herself. When Yupinian was 11 or 12 years old, his uncles sent a few enchanting maids to his courtyard. He had seen all kinds of seductive tricks, so he was naturally disgusted. But when he saw Yuxiang laughing happily, he couldn't help but laugh, so he let Yuxiang do as she pleased. Cuiping and Cui she only cared about showing off their figures, and completely didn't have the heart to catch butterflies. Even if they caught one, they would deliberately let it go, hoping that little Master Ho would look at them more. But after a long time, they couldn't stand it anymore. The golden sunlight became more and more vicious, and the dripping sweat made their hair wet. Strands of hair stuck to their cheeks, and the makeup had long been washed away, covering their faces. There was no longer any beauty to speak of. When the 2 of them wiped their sweat, they were shocked by the red and white stains on their palms. Their actions became more active, and they quickly caught a few butterflies and stuffed them into the glass jar. They lowered their heads and placed them on the windowsill, wishing that the mist would immediately send them away. Yuxiang directly opened the lid, allowing the butterflies to freely fly away. She smiled nastily and said, "Go catch them again, it's quite fun. Are you fucking deliberately playing with us?" Cuiping and Cui she were burning with anger, but she didn't dare to show it on her face. A few drops of tears squeezed out of the corners of her eyes, and she pitifully glanced at little Master Ho. Yupinian put one hand on Yuxiang's waist, stabilizing her body that was trembling from laughing. Her other hand was holding a travel book, and she was engrossed in reading it, ignoring the 2 girls. "What, I can't order you around, can I?" The smile on Yuxiang's face instantly disappeared. We don't dare, we'll go now." Cuiping and Cui she's voice carried a hint of sobbing. Unwilling to give up, they looked at little Master Ho, and just happened to meet his bone-piercing cold eyes. Their hearts were frightened. Yuxiang wanted to reprimand them again, but she heard a clear and sweet voice coming from the courtyard entrance, "The sun is so vicious, if it continues, they'll definitely get heatstroke. Little sister, please do a good deed and let these 2 girls go." Yuxiang stretched her neck to take a look, and saw that Yuxiu had returned to the Jianghu. Her beautiful face glowed with the radiance of the Virgin Mary. She lazily waved her hand and sneered, "I prefer to build my happiness on top of other people's pain, what can you do about it? If you can't stand it, then go ask the old ancestor for their slave contracts." Building one's happiness on top of other people's pain, these words were really perverse. But Xiang Er's legs were crippled, and the pain she received in life was far more than the happiness. Although she tried her best to hide it, Yupinian still found that she often cried behind closed doors while smiling brightly in front of others. The desire to protect her, to make her smile forever, grew stronger with each passing day. If he could make her feel happy through this method, then even if her temperament became perverse and tyrannical, so what? Not only would Yupinian not stop her, but he would also do his best to satisfy all her wishes. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.